at this point, it's in the best interest of the defense to reveal it during the defense's case in chief. Not in page 20 of the transcript that was provided to the court of the Calabasas issue. That's the way it comes up in the tape. And there's also on the same page on page 19 a reference to the Princeton issue, which we believe refers to the those two incidents have not been the subject of testimony in front of the jury yet. And we would move to exclude cross-examination of Dr. Conte about those issues under Evidence Code Section 352 and 1101.
Being ejected from Princeton University for a year, which is already in front of the jury. I don't have any information to suggest that Mr. Menendez, the father, was aware of the Princeton burglary. But as far as the Calabasas burglary, it's always been the people's, it's always been a problem for the people as to Lyle Menendez, as to whether or not we could prove that he in fact participated. And I think because of his statement, which appears to be freely and voluntarily given at page 19, about his father crying after the Calabasas issue, and he apologizing, not Eric apologizing, but Eric and I were very sorry. He told his father. I think now we have sufficient indication that he in fact did participate in the Calabasas issue, so that Dr. Conte should be asked about it.
All right, did you want to respond?
Well, the only reference, the reference she's referring to is he couldn't withstand it. He cried after the Calabasas issue. After I said that, Eric and I were sorry. It doesn't indicate what he's sorry for. It does not indicate what his participation, if any, in the Calabasas burglary was. And that's the only reference throughout this entire tape. So I don't think this is sufficient to prove up Lyle Menendez's participation in the incidents, sufficient to allow a detailed examination into that incident, which I think would open up collateral issues as to the nature of his participation in that incident, and would really require the defense to respond to the underlying facts of that case, which I think, in terms of probative value versus prejudice, should be excluded under 352.
When you discuss the matter of the father's reaction, it clearly is probative, the defendant's description of it. As far as the defendant's involvement, he does acknowledge by his statement involvement. The only issue is what is meant by the Calabasas issue, as to what it was. I don't quite understand how the defense was going to approach this whole area with Dr. Conte, who is your next witness. How are you going to deal with the content of the tape itself?
Well, he's going to talk primarily prior to the tape about the way that it was made, the motivation for it, listening to it, what it reflected to him in terms of what was actually going on. We're going to play
this based on his conversations with the defendant, or just
yes, in part, and also in listening to it, and other information. He has other information he has about Dr. Oziel, other testimony that he's read, and then we're going to play the tape, and then he was going to what he would explain prior to the tape would be the fact that the content of the tape is basically a repeat of the material that was developed on November the 2nd with Dr. Oziel. What happened on November the 2nd is that Lyle Menendez had testified that when he met with Dr. Oziel said, "Why'd you do this?" They said, "We don't really know. We don't want to talk about the facts." Dr. Oziel then proposed various hypotheticals, which they signed on to, in some cases rejected in others, and testified that some others were never suggested at all. And Dr. Conte is then going to be able to compare what was in Lyle Menendez's testimony, what Lyle Menendez told him, the content of the tape, which I think will reflect that the items that he testified they had agreed to on November the 2nd are in fact in the tape, and that is why he gives the tape the significance or lack of significance that he does.
Could I add one additional factor in terms of the ambiguity of the comment that he was sorry? On page 20 of the transcript, Lyle Menendez says he, meaning the father, even told Eric that the Calabasas issue and the way he, meaning Eric, handled it, he handled it terribly. If he were in charge of it, he could have handled it way better than Eric. And I think that statement in the context of the previous one does not indicate an admission by Lyle Menendez that he is a participant in the burglary.
Well, what you're saying is you want to go into what Lyle Menendez told Dr. Conte about various things, but you don't want questioning of Dr. Conte about what Lyle Menendez told Dr. Conte about this incident. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the tape is going to be in evidence.
I understand that.
So
what I asked of you earlier and what Mrs. Lansing responded to related to what Dr. Conte would say.
The purpose of the examination here would be to indicate whether, having heard the tape, Dr. Conte's opinion is changed with regard to the motivation for the killings.
Well, when we talked about relevance, we were discussing in the context of relevant to the mental or emotional condition, exception of section 1016 of the evidence code. Now you're talking about relevance to the case itself, which is a separate issue, and you're also discussing the offer of the tape by the defense to corroborate the defendant's testimony, which is a separate issue altogether. And if you offer it for that purpose, then the entire content of the conversation becomes relevant.
Well, I think that Mr. Briggs already indicated that we are playing with the tape at different, which obviously we claim both privileges for this tape. It was not our intention to ever open this tape up. It is now open, but, and now it's going to be a question of how people interpret the tape.
I think the point is, Your Honor, even if this tape is some sort of an admission by law Menendez that he participated in a burglary in 1987 or 88, without the jury knowing the underlying facts of that burglary, which are certainly not to be able to prove through Dr. Conte, because he doesn't have that knowledge. How is that admission, which is strictly prejudicial and involves other crimes evidence, how is that in any way probative of any issue in the case?
The admission by itself may not be. The relevance is the description of the father's reaction to it, which is at variance with other testimony offered by the defense, including the defense testimony regarding the father and his behavior. That is the relevance of it. It relates to the defendant's mental condition and emotion at or near the time of the killings, vis-a-vis his father, his attitude towards the father, and whether he was in fear of his father, and the relevant mental and emotional conditions that are at issue.
But it would seem that point could be made through some reference, as there is in the tape, to an issue involving Calabasas. The underlying details are not important. The main thing is that the father was upset about something that happened in Calabasas. Why did the underlying details add anything to that inference?
Well, I didn't hear that the prosecution intended to introduce the underlying details at this point. So what was it that you intended to do, if anything?
I intended to ask him about his consideration of the Calabasas burglary and his analysis of Jerome Menendez.
And when you ask those questions, how would you phrase them?
Your Honor, I don't know, because it depends on how the defense is going to deal with it when they question him. Let me just say this, having listened now to the defense offer of proof, it appears that part of the reason Dr. Conte is being called is to make some sort of argument on behalf of the defendant. If this particular this tape corroborates the defendant's testimony, and to that extent, I think his testimony, his expertise is not required. I think that's a matter of argument. So it seems to me that whatever reason they have for calling him, making an argument that this is corroborative should not be one of the things he's called for. I mean, I think that this is not a matter beyond common experience and an expert is needed.
Well, I don't know exactly what it is that they're going to be eliciting from him. You're asking him to just compare what was said during the defendant's testimony with what is on the tape, and obviously that comparison can be done by the jury. It doesn't require any expertise. So
No, it's
just goes beyond that.
It's just the basis of his opinion, Your Honor. I'm going to ask him if he rendered an opinion here before in terms of what he believes to be the motivation for the killings, and he believed that the motivation was fear. I'm going to ask him if he's listened to this tape. I'm going to ask him if that changed his opinion in any way and the reasons. So, and part of the reasons are obviously the content of the tape in terms of whether they are consistent or inconsistent, or, partly the content, the consistency or inconsistency of the content, and partly the manner in which the material is presented.
All right, certainly that would be an appropriate inquiry as far as whether his opinion would be changed by the content of the tape. As far as the defense objection to reference to the burglary, Calabasas burglary, it seems to me clear that there should be content of the tape referring to the father's reaction before the trial of fact. That should be part of the tape recording that is played, if it is played. And from what I've heard here, the defense did not intend to remove that from the playing of the tape, just to attempt to curtail the nature of the cross-examination. Is that correct?
Well, I guess we skipped a step, which was, I think the defense assumed that if we made that motion, which we do, that the court would say that under 356, it would be part of the same conversation and the court would allow it in. That was our assumption. Not that we're volunteering that portion, but that the court would rule that the entire conversation would be admissible under 356.
Right, so making that assumption, then you intended to play the entire tape.
Correct.
Okay. And as far as the examination of the defendant, or if he does testify, or Dr. Conte relating to the burglary, I'd have to hear his response to that particular segment of the tape as to how he reacted to it, if at all, before I can go any further as far as details of it, and we'll just have to wait until he testifies if there is question along those lines and deal with it further at that point. As far as the defense position that there was some mention made that there was a compulsion of the court order relating to the playing of the tape, and the way it came out, it sounded as though the prosecution was under some compulsion of the court order to play the tape.
No, I didn't mean that. That was sloppy language on my part. I meant that the prosecution was free to use the tape under the court's ruling, not that they were compelled to do so.
Right. As far as the defense position that you were now compelled to play the tape and deal with it because of what the prosecution might do in its rebuttal, my view is that it's your choice as to whether to play it or not. And, I'm not making any findings that you're being compelled to do so. You're just doing it because you want to play it at this point.
And it was over the people's objection, which we never resolved, except the court did indicate that the court found the state of mind objection under 1250, the state of mind exception to be compelling. And so I assume that the court, by making that statement last week, or whenever it was, at least, or last year, has indicated that it's permissible for the defense to do this and move the people presenting it.
Yes, if the people had pursued their objection, my position would be that the defense wants to play it now, they can play it. All right, is there anything else now before we proceed with Dr. Conte?
Your Honor, I no longer need a 20-minute break afterwards, but I would like the standard, whatever break we're going to have after that.
Yes.
But I'm ready.
Anything else?
No.
We have just one moment.
Sure.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Qunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Qunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Qunol, the brand I trust.
Okay, why don't you wait outside, Dr. Conte, we'll have to come back in a moment. All right.
In discussing that paragraph, the only observation that Dr. Conte made to me with regard to the content of it was the fact that it is so internally inconsistent, that there is reference to the father crying after these various incidents, and then in the same paragraph, there is the comment by Menendez that he's never seen his father cry, and that is a pattern that is repeated throughout the tape, where there is reference to material where at one point he says he signed on to Dr. Oziel's theory about the mother was killed because she went to commit suicide, and then he says right after that, I almost believe it's true. Conte's identified him giving information and then contradicting it within the same paragraph, sometimes within the same sentence. And that was the significance that he attached to that paragraph, and that was going to be what he was going to be asked in that regard, rather than the content of particular items referred to. So it would be our position that that does not in any way go to underlying circumstances, particularly something that happened a year before with regard to the mindset. Merely reflects, it is more appropriately reflective of Juan Menendez's extremely confused state of mind at that time, where he is giving totally contradictory information on various subjects, rather than the significance of any significance to the burglary at all. It wasn't his opinion that the burglary had any role in what was happening in the last 4 or 5 days.
And it would be the people's position that if Dr. Conte chooses to ignore certain things, or the defense chooses to minimize them, that the people should be able to cross-examine, to test the sincerity and preparation of the witness.
But I'm not sure that's any different than when Dr. Conte testified the first time in the court ruled that this was material that could not be gone into. I think the exact same arguments apply.
I believe the court's ruling was that the absence of people's ability to prove that Juan Menendez was in fact involved in these burglaries, the court would, in fact, I remember the court specifically asking me, do you have proof of his involvement? And I said, no, that I didn't feel it was sufficient. And now I think that is that proof, so I can make a good faith offer to the court that he was in fact involved in the second burglary, and that I should be able now to ask about it, because now that we have the tape, we have the proof.
Well, for the witness to say, in his opinion, this incident didn't play any role in the killing of the parents, opens the subject up for
No,
discussion
he
as
wasn't
to,
going to say that. I wasn't going to ask him that. I'm just indicating.
well, you said that's a state of mind.
Well, but in terms of analyzing this tape and the impact of this tape on his opinion, he does not feel that, he does not feel, number one, according to what he told me, that this tape is reliable because of a number of factors, the way it was made, the motivation for making it, the content itself, in fact, in view of the fact that Dr. Oziel was doing so much of the talking and suggesting theories, that it's his opinion that this is an unreliable bit of information to begin with, and it doesn't change his opinion.
And the people's position that his opinion that this is unreliable should not be presented to the jury. It is improper opinion. It's not, he's here to testify about the defendant's state of mind on the night of the murder, not as to how this tape was made. And it appears to me he probably doesn't have sufficient information. And there are certain things that we know about how the tape was made that would contradict this particular opinion. It is totally improper opinion for him to say that.
Yeah, as far as some underlying opinion that it is not reliable, that's clearly not something that would be permitted.
Well, but he's talking about whether, what a therapy session is.
Well, he can certainly describe his view of how a therapy session should be conducted, and that this was not, in his view, one that was conducted in a normal fashion. That's his opinion. But it seems to me that the way you're arguing this, the cross-examination of the witness could very well deal with whether or not he discussed these specific things with the defendant and what the defendant told him about these things, and whether those things would or did have any impact on his opinions. And I think that opens the area up for examination. I don't think you can just have a witness testify. It wouldn't matter to me. It didn't play any role. It wouldn't play any role in how I formed opinions about this matter. Therefore, don't ask me. If you do that, you're just limiting the cross-examination unfairly.
Okay, is the court, I'm just wondering what kind of parameters the court's thinking of with regard to what the prosecution would be allowed to ask in that regard. In terms, I don't want the prosecution.
You know, rather than feeding information.
But Your Honor, shouldn't I be allowed to ask him if you knew that this burglary involved the theft of approximately $80,000 to $100,000 worth of property, would that change your opinion? That is certainly a correct hypothetical to ask him.
Well, I don't think it is unless she's using the underlying facts of the burglary as other crimes evidence. Where's the similarity in these two crimes that allows use of the underlying facts to argue that because they stole $100,000 or they took money, that this murder is somehow motivated by money? I'm not sure I follow the train of
It's
logic.
never really been offered for that purpose. It was offered and received as to the other defendant in relationship to how the father and or the mother reacted to it, and a significant issue in their relationship, and also the motivation for the initial therapy sessions with Dr. Oziel. Those are primarily the reasons it was received as to the co-defendant. It was never offered as purely evidence to establish identification or intent and things of that sort.
But
It was never really offered.
And I guess that's my point. If that's the case, then why do the underlying facts of the burglary and the specifics of the dollar amount become relevant on the theory that it's being offered?
I suppose it relates to how the father reacted to it, and the nature of his reaction dealing with a crime of this nature rather than petty theft or something which less significant. Drive by the defendant on the tape, assuming that that's an accurate description, and it reflects how the father treated the sons.
Well, it would seem to me if there was some dispute about did the father react negatively, then the underlying facts may be relevant to show that given the nature of the crime, the father had every reason to react negatively. But here you have Lyle Menendez saying the father really reacted badly to the Calabasas issue. So the prosecution has the advantage of that statement that there was a bad reaction as a result of that incident. And in those circumstances, it seems unnecessary and prejudicial to go further and say, let's now talk about what that burglary involved. They already have the benefit of the father reacting in a negative, extremely negative way by virtue of the state.
Well, is there any dispute as far as the amount of property was taken in the burglary? Is it really, when you talk about a 352 analysis going beyond the subject of prejudice, which is what you're focusing on, to other areas of problems of proof and things of that nature, is there really a dispute as to how much property was taken?
Well, but that's not the point. It is that a $100,000 burglary is more prejudicial than a petty theft. And once the prosecution interjects that issue into the case, an extremely prejudicial incident, then the issue becomes, well, what was Lyle Menendez's involvement in this $100,000 burglary? And then it gets us into collateral issues. So no, there's no dispute that it involved $100,000. The dispute centers on what his involvement was. And we have a stipulation by the co-defendant that's not before our jury. So the problem was alleviated with reference to Eric Menendez because it was a stipulation. There is no stipulation here. And Lyle Menendez's reference to being sorry is just too ambiguous to tie him into this, sufficient to remove that issue from the case.
Your Honor, the burglary is not a collateral issue. It's something that was specifically mentioned by Lyle Menendez in a rather lengthy monologue that he gave. As the court will recall, Dr. Oziel was allowed to be impeached with a 1982 or 3 incident involving a man named Court Day, and the court didn't rule that that was collateral, even though the people urged such a theory.
I don't see the relevance of comparing impeachment of a witness with other crime evidence offered.
Well, Your
As a
Honor,
defendant. There's no connection between the two.
Your Honor, the people are not offering this particular evidence under 1101B. The people are offering it to show motivation on the part of the defendant, separate and apart from the strictures of 1101B. Now that the defendant has put his emotional and mental condition at issue and has offered to deal with this particular case by further putting his emotional and mental condition at issue, the issue of prior criminal behavior is something that any competent psychologist would want to consider in evaluating a person. And even if the people, let's say the defendant had a lengthy rap sheet, which he does not, in evaluating a defendant, a competent psychologist would consider that rap sheet in the prior arrest, and the people should be allowed to question about it. In this particular case, it's even more relevant because of Lyle Menendez's description of his father on the witness stand, his brother's description of the father, which is at variance with the description given in this particular incident. So I think it's relevant on several grounds, and it's not just the 1101B, which is the argument the defense offers, but it has to do with many other issues as well.
Well, I think the prosecution is confused in stating the thrust of the mental state evidence. This is not a case where the experts are testifying that in their opinion, the defendants had a good character trait involving lack of violent tendencies, and therefore they could not have been involved in the commission of this crime. This is a case where the thrust of the expert testimony is as a result of a long history of abuse. The abuse played into producing antisocial acts. So proving up other antisocial acts doesn't really undercut the thrust of the expert testimony that's being offered.
What I will do at this point is rule that the prosecution may ask whether or not the witness considered the defendant's involvement in a burglary of a residence in Calabasas. I think the dollar amount at this point really has anything to do with it, but the witness's testimony is such that it becomes relevant that it can very easily expand. I can't anticipate exactly how it will go, but it could very well. But in light of the way this evidence is being introduced at this late stage against this defendant, as opposed to how it was introduced early on in regards to the co-defendant and the stipulation that was arrived at by the parties during people's almost case in chief. The court finds that at this point, the dollar amount doesn't have any substantial relevance in relationship to the defendant Lyle Menendez. But that could change depending on the nature of his examination. I can't anticipate exactly what he will say.
And I will approach before I ask anything like that.
Anything else?
No.
Right, and the court does make its analysis under section 352 of the evidence code. And I do find, as I've already said, that the probative value of this evidence, how the father reacted to it, and more specifically, the defendant's description of the father's reaction to it, that probative value is substantial and substantially outweighs prejudicial effect. All right, anything else now before the jury comes in? All right, let's get the jury tonight.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
I have all of the old jurors in the courtroom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, and we're ready to resume. The defense may call its next witness.
Thank you. The defense calls Dr. John Conte.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give without opinion before this court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
You take and receive your name for the
John Robert Conte, C-O-N-T.
Dr. Conte, you testified in this courtroom some time ago with regard to your analysis of Joseph Lyle Menendez, who's seated here in front of me. Is that correct?
Yes,
And the connection of his lifetime experiences and the killing of his parents on August 20th, 1989.
yes,
Is that correct? Since you were here to testify, have you had the opportunity to review some additional materials?
yes,
And the additional material in particular was a tape recording of a session on December 11th, 1989, with Dr. Oziel, Eric Menendez, and Lyle Menendez. Is that correct?
yes,
And does that tape recording contain the voices of all three of these individuals discussing the facts surrounding the killing of the parents?
yes,
And in this tape recorded document, are there actually facts about the killing itself or more motivation, family constellation type material?
Objection and proper opinion.
Overall, you can answer the question.
I say there tends to be more information about the family constellation.
Okay, so this is not a tape about how many shots were fired or what type of ammunition was used or that type of thing?
That's correct.
And did you review that tape to determine whether it affected your opinion in this case?
Yes,
And the opinion you previously testified to was that you believe the motivation for the killings was fear. Is that correct?
yes,
And having reviewed that tape recording, do you still hold the same opinion or do you have a different opinion?
I hold the same opinion about the fear.
And has anything about your opinion changed by virtue of having listened to that tape recording?
Yes.
And what changes, if any?
Well, I think that this tape recording is an indication of what transpired between the Menendez brothers and Dr. Oziel suggests or raises greater concern about Dr. Oziel's technique and purpose in relating to the Menendez brothers.
You gotta move to strike the answer as being a proper opinion on the part of the witness.
Overall, the answer will stand.
And what do you mean with regard to technique?
Well, this is, my understanding is that this was supposed to be a therapeutic relationship in which Dr. Oziel was the therapist for both of these boys. And it's possible in analyzing a transcript of the session to get some idea of how a professional approaches that task. And in analyzing how this session was conducted, I think it illustrates a number of concerns that I'd had some awareness about before, but became more clear in looking at this tape.
What specific concerns are you talking about?
Well, to answer that, I have to sort of explain for just a minute what therapy is, because it's what lots of people think therapy is based on Bob Newhart or movies or what have you. It's not really what therapy is all about. So to understand this tape, you have to understand something about therapy. There are different schools or models of therapy. Some models suggest that you teach clients new behaviors so they can act in different ways. And some schools teach people to, or help people gain insight into how past experiences influence present functioning. But across the models of therapy, there's more in common than there is in separate. And what is essentially at the core of all therapeutic approaches is a special relationship, a relationship which is designed to meet the needs of the client. And so there are what we call ground rules or boundaries, or there are ideas, principles about how you proceed. Confidentiality is one such, but there are other examples. And all of those rules are designed to make it possible for the client to trust the helper, the therapist, and be able to tell the therapist any thought or feeling or impulse or any idea, and not feel that they're going to be rejected or judged, but rather accept it. And so it's the responsibility of the therapist to create an environment in which therapy can take place, in which there's an understanding about the ground rules, and in fact, in which the ground rules are implemented.
And how do you find that that was not carried out? What is reflected in this tape that suggests that that was not carried out?
Well, I think there are a number of boundary violations. One of them, I think, for example, is there is a universal prohibition in all therapeutic models about dual relationships. You don't become your client or your patient's lover or friend or business partner. And the reason for that is the therapist has greater power, so it can't be an equal relationship. And if the client has the idea that the therapist may engage in these other activities, then they will no longer be as safe to communicate or to share information or to explore inner things about themselves.
Let me stop you. Is what you're suggesting is that if someone is going to end up in another relationship, in addition to the therapeutic one, that is a business or friendship or love relationship, they'll want to be an equal in that relationship? And so if in therapy they reveal secrets about themselves, they'll be more vulnerable?
Yes, but it's more than that. The argument is that because of the therapist's lack of emotional involvement and because they are in a more powerful position, it is forever impossible to make a more balanced relationship, such as a kind of relationship you'd want between business partners, where both people were equally able to protect their own individual best interests. And so most professional societies forbid forever, not just when therapy ends, but forbid forever a therapist ever going into a dual relationship, such as business or a personal relationship, friendship or love relationship, because the feeling is that the relationship started out unequal and it can never become equal, and therefore is always the opportunity or the danger that the therapist will use his superior knowledge or his advantage for his own rather than the client's own interest.
Now, you're aware of testimony here in this trial, testimony by Lau Menendez and Eric Menendez and their uncle Carlos, that Dr. Oziel had interjected himself into their possible financial future. Is that correct?
Yes.
He'd involved himself in helping them select a probate lawyer. He had suggested that he would help them invest in future businesses if they should ever get any inheritance, that type of information. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is that one of the areas that you're expressing concern about, is the fact that he had established already that he would be a business partner of theirs in the future?
That's one of the areas in which he appears to have broken a fundamental principle of therapy, and therefore to understand the tape, one has to understand that there is a real possibility that this is in fact not a therapeutic relationship, because a critical tenet of therapy has been violated.
You also have information, I believe, in terms of the fact that the last time that Lau Menendez saw Dr. Oziel the last session that he had with him prior to this session was November the 2nd.
Is that correct?
Yes,
And from November the 2nd to December 11th, there are no notes, no indication that there was any sort of therapeutic session going on.
yes,
Is that correct?
yes,
You also have information that this session was conducted because Dr. Oziel had indicated that he wanted the contact
yes.
with Lyle and Eric Menendez, rather than them seeking him out for therapy. Is that correct?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Does it affect your opinion as to the validity of the session itself in terms of whether it is initiated by the patient or it is initiated by the therapist?
Well, to some extent, it's not just the initiation that's so important. I mean, it is conceivable for a competent therapist who hasn't seen a client for a while to initiate contact because of some concern. But if the initiation isn't for concern about the patient, but is rather concern for the therapist, emotion or financial gain or whatever it would be, then that would be another, although relatively small example of a concern that I would have about the nature of the therapeutic relationship.
In this tape recorded document, there is no reference by Lyle Menendez or Eric Menendez to having been physically, psychologically, or sexually abused. Is that correct?
Correct.
And does that concern you in any way with regard to the opinions you've rendered?
Well, it's a complex issue, but it doesn't concern me.
Why?
Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all is the sort of principle of child abuse, that many victims of child abuse are in therapy for years and years and never reveal. Revealing abuse requires a level of comfort. We suspect that one of the reasons that people reveal abuse in therapy is when the therapist asks them about past experiences. And if therapists don't ask, many times victims won't tell, and there are complex reasons for that. Especially where there is an improper therapeutic situation, it's not at all surprising that people would not reveal things which are particularly anxiety producing or traumatic. And I think everything I've learned about this relationship suggests that it was not a good therapeutic one, and therefore it's not surprising that Lyle would not reveal to this individual critical things about his past and about his experience.
In your experience in working with Lyle Menendez, did you find that he was able to give you all of the information he had all at once, or that you gradually would get more and more information?
I think my experience with Lyle is consistent with my experience with other survivors, which is they reveal in very small doses. They reveal a little bit at a time. That's partly to protect themselves. It's partly to protect the person who's listening. It's partly to see if what they reveal is going to have any negative impact on them, so that what is sometimes called a rolling disclosure or a gradual disclosure over time is the norm rather than the exception in abuse.
And in Lyle Menendez's case, he first was able to discuss his abuse by his mother, and then considerably later his abuse by his father. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that also consistent with your experience?
Well, it's consistent with my experience. It's also consistent with my understanding that it was, for him, the abuse by the father, which was far more conflictual or far more anxiety producing or traumatic or painful. And so he revealed that much later.
Yeah. When you listened to the tape of December the 11th, did you find it to be consistent with what Lyle Menendez had testified to he had already agreed to in the November 2nd session?
Your Honor, objection is improper opinion.
Sustained.
In listening to the tape recording of December the 11th, were you listening to see if new material was disclosed?
Well, I was listening for a number of things. I was listening to see if there was new information or information that would alter something that I understood. I was listening for what the interaction would tell me about the nature of the relationship between Dr. Oziel and his two clients. I was listening for any information that it would give me about the events that I had previously assessed, or the emotional state of the person that I had evaluated, because this was potentially a sample of behavior from long before I'd actually met.
You said one of the areas that you analyzed was the material.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And what conclusions did you form based on that evaluation?
Well, I may have used a clinical term by material. Material is, when we use it in therapy, we're talking not only about the facts of what was said and whether it's consistent, but also how it is said and what it tells us about the individual psychologically. And so I was listening both for facts that I'd been told or read to see if they were new or different or challenged. And I was also listening for the emotional content or material from, especially from Lyle, but to some extent from Eric and Dr. Oziel also.
And what with regard to the facts was significant to you about this tape?
Well, I think there are a number of things. There is some information which is not consistent with other information I had obtained. So there's some things here which are inconsistent with my understanding about various personalities. I think it's also was significant to me that there were things in Dr. Oziel's understanding or theory of what happened that weren't even present here. And that was surprising to me.
What do you mean by that? Things that were in Dr. Oziel's understanding that weren't present there?
Objection, improper opinion.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take quinol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why quinol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Quinol, the brand I trust.
Well, again, it's sort of, it's hard to answer because I filter it through the whole context of my understanding what's going on, but there was no discussion of perfect crime, for example. There was testimony that Dr. Oziel had given that one of, at least my reading of it, I didn't actually see his testimony, but my reading of the testimony was that one of the motives was to create a perfect crime, and there was no mention anywhere in this material of a perfect crime. And that was surprising since I thought that was part of what Dr. Oziel said was happening.
Dr. Oziel also, with regard to perfect crime, did you read Lyle Menendez's testimony with regard to, Lyle Menendez was asked about Dr. Oziel's testimony. Dr. Oziel had said that they had talked about a perfect crime. Lyle Menendez in his testimony indicated that had never been part of the discussion. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Dr. Oziel talked about killing the father for hatred. And Lyle Menendez in his testimony indicated that had never been part of the discussion. Does that theme appear anywhere in the tape, that there's hatred?
No. There is mention to hate, but there's not hatred of father as a motive for the parents' death.
Okay. The tape does not contain a discussion of self-defense, is that correct?
Correct.
It does have an explanation for how the killings occurred, or why the killings occurred.
It has an explanation, yes.
Okay, and did you evaluate that explanation?
Yes.
And is there any significance with regard to any opinion you formed with regard to that explanation?
Well, I thought the essential theory, it's hard to justify it by calling it a theory, but the essential idea that, for example, mom was killed out of mercy, I thought to be psychologically naive and not to be consistent with anything that I had read or heard anywhere else.
Okay, and yet that was the theory that was suggested by Dr. Oziel and adopted by the brothers in the November 2nd session.
Objection, argumentative and improper opinion.
Sustained.
Are you aware that both Lyle and Eric Menendez indicated that this was an idea suggested by Dr. Oziel and that they agreed to.
When you say is you aware, what do you mean?
Have you read the testimony of Lyle and Eric Menendez, in which they indicate that this was the idea that mother was killed because she was suicidal and this was an act of mercy? That they had agreed with that idea November the 2nd.
Objection argumentative.
When you listened to this tape, you indicated that one of the theories expressed is this mercy killing, more or less. Is that consistent with what you had already heard had been a theory suggested previously?
Objection, improper opinion.
What other material or factual material was important to you in forming your opinion?
In terms of,
Evaluating this tape and whether it had any impact on your prior evaluation.
well, again, there was prior, I believe in Dr. Oziel's testimony, there was discussion that it was done for the money. There's nothing in this tape about doing it for the money. In fact, there's reference to being disinherited. There are other issues about the tape, I think. I mean, there are places, for example, where one or other of the boys says two things in a segment that are inconsistent with each other, so it's difficult to follow. There are many places in the tape where words would appear to have double meaning, and it's not always possible to tell what exactly is being said. Now, that's quite common sometimes with people who are in an anxious situation, is that they'll say things that can be taken double meaning, taken as one of two ways, and it's the job of the therapist to clarify it. I can't find any place in here where the therapist tried to clarify those issues where meaning was not clear.
Do you find that the content of this tape is inconsistent in terms of the theories, the explanations that Lyle and Eric are giving for why the killings occurred?
Objection, improper opinion.
The question is vague as to what you mean.
Your understanding, according to your prior testimony, was that these killings took place because of an aroused state of fear on the part of Lyle and Eric Menendez, and that they killed because they believed their lives were in danger. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does this tape reflect that fact pattern?
No.
Does this tape reflect a different fact pattern?
Yes.
And what is the fact pattern? What is the impact on your opinion of the fact that this tape contains a different scenario?
Well, again, given the context, which is the nature of the relationship between the person making the tape and these two young men, given that this tape apparently represents a discussion taking place in early November 2nd, I think, and that this is kind of a replaying of portions of that, and given the problems in the tape, given the number of problems in the material itself, such as the inconsistency and those things, it doesn't alter my understanding about what happened.
When you say that this is based on the November 2nd discussion, I mean the meeting that Lyle and Eric have with Dr. Oziel November 2nd, in which the theories are developed, it is those theories that are then recorded on this tape?
Objection, calls for speculation, lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Does it appear that after the November 2nd session that Dr. Oziel was left with the impression that this was a killing that was planned to put mother out of her misery and to punish father for having made her miserable?
Objection, calls for speculation and improper opinion.
Sustained.
Well, that's just foundational, if I may.
Objection sustained.
Okay. Does the content of the tape, in terms of the theory that it proposes, make sense to you?
Objection, improper opinion.
You have to rephrase the question. Objection sustained.
Does the material in the tape offer you an explanation which seems more logical than the explanation that was given to you as a result of interviewing Lyle and Eric Menendez and other witnesses?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained to the former question.
Your opinion is that this homicide was committed out of fear.
Yes.
Is there anything in that tape that seems to be a more logical theory, a more logical explanation that would make you doubt whether this was committed out of fear?
Objection and proper opinion.
Overruled.
No, but it's not just a matter of logic, it's a matter of what I understand about child abuse and about human behavior.
Okay, let's start with logically. Did you evaluate it on that basis
Yes,
in terms of whether this made sense?
yes.
And what was your evaluation?
Well, again, there are areas where the statements and the tape are internally inconsistent. Something is said and the opposite is said within a few seconds in a conversation. There are several references to the prior discussion, which I believe to be November 2nd, in which there's a reference to something that took place. It's not part of this tape, to some conversation or some theory between Dr. Oziel and Lyle. There's just a host of reasons to question the context in which this is made and this itself, and the theories that are actually offered, I don't think can be particularly psychologically sound.
Why?
Well, it's first of all because I don't find any evidence other than Dr. Oziel suggesting to the boys that there was a mercy element in this. Dr. Oziel, even in this tape, is sort of puzzled and doesn't understand why dad. And so here is supposed to be a tape that sort of embodies a summary or an understanding of why this took place, and the person primarily responsible for making it still doesn't seem to understand it within here.
Move to strike with Dr. Oziel's understanding of speculation on part of the witness, Your Honor.
Sustain, that portion of the answer is stricken.
Does this tape seem to still be a searching for explanations?
Objection and proper opinion.
Sustain.
When you reviewed the material, did you look at it in context of other information that you had about the family?
Yes.
And when the suggestion is made that mom is killed now because she is so miserable and so suicidal, did you consider the fact that her mental condition had been far worse in 86 and in 87
Yes.
than it was now?
Yeah, in fact, things had improved.
And did you consider the fact that the letters that are referred to, the suicide letters and the letter from Lyle asking her to leave the father, had occurred at least 2 years prior to the killing of the parents?
Yes.
And did that affect your opinion as to whether killing mother because she was suicidal made any sense?
Yes, it seemed to be a theory that was based either on old information or on information that is not consistent with other knowledge I had about the family.
And there are sections of the tape in which there are emotions described by the parents that are inconsistent with other information you had. Is that correct? Is there particularly a paragraph that talks about in which Lyle Menendez is talking about seeing his father cry?
Yes.
And in that same paragraph, does he talk about his father never cried?
Yes.
And
That was
does,
one of the examples.
examples of what? What's the impact?
Well, it's an inconsistency within a few seconds. He's describing his father crying. Nothing I've ever heard from anyone in this case suggests that Mr. Menendez was the person who was giving to showing any emotion other than perhaps rage, and certainly not an emotion that would be perceived as weakness, as crying was in that family. And so there's a description of several places where he cried, and then it's 6 or 7 lines later, so it's a few seconds of conversation later, Lyle takes it back and basically says, I cried, I never saw him cry, or something to that effect.
What's your analysis of that? To say I saw him cry and then to say he didn't cry? What's that mean to you about the content of the tape?
Well, again, it makes me question how much faith they have in the tape at all. It appears to be a script, but in spite of the script,
Your Honor, move to strike. It appears to be a script as a conclusion on the part of the witness and improper opinion.
Objection sustained. That portion of the answer is stricken.
Okay. It appears to be something that is artificial.
Artificial, it was arranged previously, there are references.
Your Honor, move to strike artificial and previous arrangement as being speculation on part of the witness, lack of foundation.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Are there references by Lyle Menendez in talking to Dr. Oziel where he says things like you said before, or as you mentioned before? Is that what you're referring to specifically?
Yes.
And what effect does that have on your evaluation of the accuracy of the content of the material?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Does that have any effect?
Yes.
Objection, improper opinion, improper area of inquiry.
Proper what?
Area of inquiry for this witness.
Overall.
Does that have any effect on your opinion as to the accuracy of the information? If it
Yeah.
seems to, and what is that?
Objection, improper opinion.
Overall.
Well, again, I think it indicates that this is a set of ideas which have been discussed previously and which are being repeated here for the purposes of the audio tape.
In that paragraph in which there's the discussion about dad crying, there's a reference to something called the Calabasas incident.
Yes,
And what do you believe that to refer to?
I believe that refers to some burglaries that took place in Calabasas.
And what is your information with regard to Lyle Menendez's involvement?
My understanding is that his brother had been involved in, I think one, but I'm not absolutely sure, one burglary that, it's been a while since I thought about this, but and Eric showed Lyle some of the stuff that had been taken. Lyle, for a number of reasons, went along, was involved in another burglary. I think it was kids kind of burglarizing or whatever the proper word is, each other's homes.
You mean they knew the victims?
Yeah.
When you say kids, I mean, it's that they knew.
Objection,
They weren't
leading.
12 years old. I mean,
I'm sorry, young men, right?
so they knew the victim.
Yes. Let's see what else.
And did you take that into consideration in forming your opinions in this case?
Yes.
And in the tape, you said that it was significant to you that there were references to other sources of the material, that is the like you said or as you mentioned kind of thing. Were there other incidents in the tape that were of significance to you because they seem to be revealing more what you believe to be what really happened in terms of this being something where there wasn't any choice or that it was spontaneous? Are there statements in the tape of that nature?
There are places primarily where there is sort of double meaning or the meaning is not clear, and it could be referring to what I understood to be the events, or it could not. It was hard to tell because it wasn't followed up by Dr. Oziel.
So when you say not followed up, such as when Eric says something about I didn't have any choice, Dr. Oziel never says, what do you mean you didn't have any choice?
That's one example. I think there are a number.
Was that of any significance to you?
Well, again, yes, it goes to the confidence to have in the tape because important things are not followed up.
Was there anything in this tape that was, strike that if I may. Before you testified here in court, you reviewed Lyle Menendez's testimony about the November 2nd session with Dr. Oziel. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he indicated in court that when he walked out of Dr. Oziel's office on November 2nd, he had signed on to a planned killing of his parents, his mother because she was suicidal, and his father because he was controlling. Is that correct?
Essentially,
And you knew that before you came and testified before.
yes.
And He indicated in his testimony he had agreed to those ideas because Dr. Oziel had suggested them and he didn't want to tell what really happened. Is that correct?
Correct.
After listening to the tape, do you find that there's anything added to that in any way changes your opinion?
No.
Thank you. And I'd like to, at this time, mark for identification a transcript as 326.
Yes.
And I'd like to play the tape now for the jury, if I may. Is there any need for Dr. Conte to remain seated up there during that time?
No.
Thank you.
And I believe the bailiff has copies of the transcript to distribute. And with the caveat that the prosecution has a few words here and there that may be incorrect, and we will modify the transcript at a later date.
Your Honor,
Court's
can I beg
permission.
the indulgence of the court for 5 minutes?
Go ahead, yeah, okay, yeah. The tape will take about an hour to play, so if you want to take a short break, anybody to do whatever you want to do, we'll let you do that. And so let's take a 5-minute recess and resume in 5 minutes. Don't discuss the matter with anyone, don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume in 5 minutes.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take quinol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why quinol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Quinol, the brand I trust.
The jurors are all back and everyone else is present. Are you ready to proceed?
I believe that the stipulation by the people that the tape is as we received it. It does not appear to start at the very beginning, nor does it appear to end, seems to end mid-sentence. But that is the condition in which we received the tape from Dr. Oziel. Yes.
All right, that stipulation is noted. Do you all have a copy of the transcript? All right, again, a reminder regarding transcripts that they are only given to you as an aid to your listening to the tape recording itself. The transcripts are not 100% accurate. There are words that might be misplaced or erroneously placed on the transcript, and the tape recording itself is the evidence of the conversation and should be received as such, and the transcript is only given to you as an aid to listening to and following as you listen to the tape recording itself of the voices on the tape recording. All right, are you ready?
We are not.
Okay.
We would have no need to have the reporter to take this.
All right, and
So stipulated.
all right. Then we'll proceed. We'll go off the record so that the tape can be played.
Thank you.
We didn't know it. My father would be there, and it would just become really good to Kennedy. His father told him that he wants Bob. Not matter what God said. And we thought it was a senator, or whether we made $100 million, it would all be because my father was just incredible. It would just be the other side of what I had is that we felt really trapped. I really think that just, there wasn't really a family. When we're talking about family, you can tell the family what was wrong with your family, but in a sense, what's really wrong with your family is that there wasn't a family. There was no communication, there was no closeness, there was no bonding in your family. And the only people who had a bond really in the family, really, were the two of you. I mean, you couldn't really bond near you with your mom because of what happened with your mother in terms of all of the separation. She didn't communicate openly and honestly with you and didn't trust you ultimately. And you couldn't communicate with her and trust that she wouldn't tell your dad and trust that she wouldn't go to your dad. Your dad was like the enforcer, and your father didn't communicate honestly with your mother. And your mother was terrified of your father and would not communicate honestly with your father. The only people that were left to have a bond were the two of you. And throughout the time that I filed for a suicide note, that created a huge bond there, because he called me and so on and so forth. And then I immediately wrote my mother. Yeah, I remember that. I found the suicide note and I started crying. I could not reach my brother on the phone and started crying. Where did you find it? I found it in her drawer. I didn't know what I was looking for.
under the book. And it said that she was going to, it said that she was going to kill herself. And that,
no, that what it said is, I'm sorry I had to do this. I love you both, Lyle and Eric. I love your father. I just can't seem to deal with my own problems anymore. I want you to go ahead and have the life I thought I wanted for you and all the things I told you. And I'm really sorry it had to happen this way, but I have to do this. And blah, 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 blah. And at first, he thought it was just that my mother was leaving my father. And it was not until I told him that, don't get excited, but there's a strong possibility that what she's talking about is she's going to kill herself.
that's right.
That he became hysterical. And he said, at first you don't want to leave it there, and it was pregnant. And now it was any day.
Very effective. Yeah.
So,
Well, it was also the fact that,
at that point I was living alone in New Jersey in a mansion that had left. And that was tough. But then I immediately approached my mother. And this was really aggravating. Well, because I was alone.
well, I think that the reason,
It's a tough time because it was so far away from what people thought that you couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell my aunt. What are we going to do about my mother's suicide thing? I mean, you couldn't do anything like that. And it was just,
the reason why she didn't, I in fact believe at that time, was because she couldn't kill. I mean, you could take guns, you could put your head in, you could take sure that it takes an amazing amount of energy, but she was so drained from learning about the affair, which was right after she learned about the affair, because I was listening in the next room, and for months and months and months, I would have to listen to my mother cry in the house. I would come home, my mother would be crying upstairs, and I would just be watching TV downstairs, and I would just hear the sobbing, and I couldn't go up and see what was wrong. And I was like, I didn't have that kind of relationship. I just never, I wish I had, and I look back on now, I wish I had that kind of relationship. But I remember when we first moved out and we were living in the condominium, right, I was here right to the wall, and I was listening about how they were about to have a divorce, and how my dad was telling my mom that they should not have a divorce. And while we was that year, we were just coming right through it, right? And from listening to her, she wasn't strong enough. But you listening. And she knew we first moved out. That was years ago. Yeah, it was years ago. So,
Well, when you ended up killing your mom, did you feel like you were sparing her? Yeah, I know she was horribly depressed, and she was totally dominated by your dad. She was like a shell of the person. She had no identity or strength left anymore. You had been, I know that you had been responding to her as I think almost like a person that becomes sort of pitiful. Yeah, that's a strong word, but is that how you felt?
Well, we were doing almost my mom's case, something that first of all, there's no way we never put your name without the father.
that was something that we had to really, it was a big thing holding us back from killing my father, is that we thought that we would just kill Dad and eliminate the father. And see, the first step, which is when I found out the first suicide note, and then it got worse and worse, but whether, okay, I'll now support my mother, Eric and I decided we would rally behind my mother, that my father would take care of himself, he would understand, he'd probably want us to rally again for my mother, because all along his view was, you protect your mother, she's your mother, you only have one mother, maybe your father, but your father is not as close to you as your mother. And that was his view, and even though I was never as close to my mother as Eric in the early years, and I sort of rallied behind my dad because we had more in common and so on. But so I decided, okay, I'm going to rally behind my mother. And I had a conversation with her. I wrote her a long letter saying if she ever wanted to leave Dad and whatever, she could move to Princeton. I'd live with her. She wouldn't be alone. There'd be no problems. There wouldn't be any big fight over custody of the children. We'd go with her if she wanted and visit back and forth, whatever she wanted. And that didn't work because she cut me short immediately. There was no discussion. It was, Lyle, you're fabricating this. I started out by not wanting to really deal with the problems. I didn't want to know I found the note wouldn't be as effective. So I said, I started to go through all the things that aggravated me about Dad and how he was suppressing myself and all these things. And she kept saying, no, she wouldn't even let me do that. She would. This is something you're fabricating. This, you know that really you bring up a lot of this upon yourself, Lyle. You don't realize it. You don't realize that. And it was just all untrue. She was the worst psychologist ever. She was not, in my opinion, a good open mother like she wanted to be. I felt that at that point she was so tainted by the fact that things were so horrible between her and Dad that she couldn't come out and say, you know, you're right, I'm having the same problems with my husband that you're having with your father, and maybe we should talk about it. Like a mother should. Even just out of curiosity of wanting to discuss something. She would rather discuss my girlfriend than my relationship with my father. And she was definitely with Dad on that issue. And so it was a dead issue within 5 minutes. I don't talk about it. Nope, you're wrong. You're overreacting. You want to leave the family and you want to go off on your own. Fine. Yeah, no one really talked about it except Eric. Except Eric. And I sort of just said, all right, fine. She doesn't want to get divorced. Things seemed to almost get better. And then all of a sudden they just turned for the worse. And I think they turned for the worse after she found out that she made a decision that she couldn't take it anymore and that Dad didn't love her anymore. And I believe it was after she found out about one of the affairs, like the main affair that had been 8 years long or whatever. Maybe after she found out there would be more than one. It was some point when she just decided, boom, no way did he ever love me. I was wrong thinking that he loved me and he was just doing this because he needed to. And at this point I had stopped trying to help her divorce. So she didn't have my support anymore. I was, gradually being separated from her because she was no longer someone I could talk to about anything. Anything I talked to her about, I would touch her father. Did she actually get angry bringing up stuff with She was very cold. My mother was always very good in stressful situations. Very calm. This was obviously something that was of extreme stress for her. If Edgar walked in the room when she was crying, or when I did, she would stop crying. I want to talk about it. My own problems. Blah, blah, blah. She wouldn't let you in though? No, very matter of fact also about stressful things, which would mean if I started saying, what I would do would be to try to get her emotional and get her emotions out. Hey, I'm with you. I think we should leave Dad. He's crazy. He's doing this and this to you. It's obvious. He's doing this to me. Her reaction is, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I think you're overreacting. Wow. Here's all the reasons, things that, wow, he bought you this car. He really wanted you to do this. He wanted you to do that. He's a loving father. I don't know what he's talking about. I think we should stop talking about it. How angry. And, what? How angry was her? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's extremely angry with me because she was putting me in a position to defend the things that my father was doing to me, and that wasn't supposed to be the issue. That was the thing that I had to get past her, the things he was doing to me, to get to the things he was doing to her, and there was just no way. You couldn't even get her to acknowledge that he was doing anything to her or to you. I mean, she wouldn't even, you were trying to protect her, and you were trying to say, Mom, we know what he's doing. And you were trying to tell her that he was doing the same thing to you and to her and to Eric, and she wouldn't acknowledge he was doing any of it and turned it around and actually blamed you as if you were angry. And she basically invalidated all of your perceptions and everything that you knew that was going on. She told you wasn't happening, got angry at you, blamed you, turned on you, and you ended up trying to protect her and getting punished and rejected. And as a person who told you were a bad guy, when really what you were trying to do is save her from what your dad was doing to you and your mom. I mean, that's what I meant. That's it. And I didn't try as much as I wished I would have tried. I didn't know a lot of it. I found out a lot of it later on. I found out more and more and more. And in my opinion, she got worse and worse and worse. And but for a while, I was traveling so much, I was away from the picture. I'd only hear about it from Eric. to me, it was a sign that it was getting worse. And she was finally telling me and go, you don't understand how much stress I'm under. I take 13 pills a day. You know, be careful about this Princeton issue or whatever. I'm not handling it well. I want to hear about this or that. And, you know, but there was no way I could open up to her about the real issue. Just knew that she was seeking help, and I was hoping to help. I mean, from my girlfriend reading the letters that I found afterwards and then before, her conclusion, and it seems to be a lot of my relatives' conclusion, is that my mother could possibly have staged the whole thing and killed both of them herself because she was unable to kill herself. And so she had somebody, she just said, okay, kill us at some point. And that's their feeling. I mean, obviously, in my family, I don't have, but I just see how they believe that, reading those letters. You know, I kept thinking it over, almost as if it was true. Almost as if I was like an instrument of hers in killing herself. That's where we sort of feel like, like before, that we were doing her and us a favor in putting her out of her misery, really, in that she could kill herself at any moment. And our reaction was, we knew that if she killed herself, my father would be trouble. He would physically not be able to handle that because she was really a helpless victim. And we saw, I saw her going through her own.
I had in my mind that I would be the person. If my mother killed herself, I would hate my father for life. And maybe something like that.
And I didn't know how my mother could live with it because, and I tried not to think about it. Thinking about it is a very painful thing. That's why I don't have dreams about it now, and I don't think about it now. It's a serious sore spot, my mother, and that whole issue, because, you know, even if I think about it at the moment, I say to myself, Dad was having an affair the whole time he was saying he was out late, working, and she was at home bearing the fact that she couldn't be with her husband, they couldn't go to the dinner parties and so on, to take care of his kids and do all the things he wanted her to do, and she worked like a dog doing that, thinking she was helping their relationship for a better time, and then he would come home and say he's tired from working late and therefore didn't want to go to the dinner parties, and she would cry about that, but she would have to, her strength came from the fact that she was doing it for the family and for her, and so she was going to sacrifice, and she realized that the 20 years of sacrifice was for nothing. She was going around with other women and so on, and that her whole basis for being able to go through it all was really a falsehood, and that I could see how, boom, you want to say yourself, can't handle my whole life the way I've wasted all these years. I could have been something. Our feelings, she would tell us about all the things she could have been and done and couldn't, because she told us that gave me an ultimatum. Take care of the kids and stay home and forget your acting and the host stuff. They love you off and all this other stuff. And that was my dad's general feeling when she was crying, which was, hey, you know, I want my life the way I want it. If I have to do things I don't want to do to satisfy the marriage, that's not the way I want to move. We'll go our separate ways. And my feeling was very strong. That's not the way it is. I told him flat out when he made sacrifices in order to have a relationship, to make compromises. The whole point of the relationship. He's not going to get exactly what you want. You kind of come to, you know, you go to a dinner party even if you don't want to, because he hasn't been able to go to one of those because he didn't want to. It was not his feeling at all that he could do that. How he was trying to say, he responded by saying, well, I'm not prepared to do that. My feeling is that you have a relationship, one person controls the show. If I have to do things I don't want to do, even the smallest things, then I don't want to be a part of the relationship. So the kids were in Norway. The kids were in Norway, and he did that, and he was smoking a cigarette, and I remember this was very well back in Pension. And I was shocked by the statement, because I realized where if I pursued it, it could lead to divorce. If I pursued it, you know, sister-in-law, she would rather have a divorce than work out even a small thing like a dinner party. He knew it was amazing. He had total control for he wanted a divorce. And he was that, and he thought that it wasn't best that way. But that's what kept the relationship going. Was that one person knew that this person was in control, it was over. Do you think he still knew that, or do you think he needed to have that sort of control and he could justify it with those kind of things? How much did you feel that you were telling your dad because of what he was doing to you? How much did you feel you were telling your dad in part because of what he did to your mom? And what part was he? It was not because of what he was doing to me. boyfriend. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I try to be self-supportive. I'm going to marry this girl and go have my own life. And it was my mother actually telling me, okay, you do that, but it's not because of what your father is doing. I want you to know that. That would anger me and bring me back in to help her out, because I realized she was so disillusioned and fucked up over the whole thing, that she would actually think that. If she would have just said, I realize it's really saying what your dad is doing, doing all these things, it's terrible. I agree with you, and then you could go off and do your own thing. It would have been a lot easier for me to do it. I needed her agreement that there was a problem, and never get it was not. And I just think about it for one time until Eric and I would get together and we would share what was happening in the family. And it was obvious my mother was deteriorating. We didn't want to get to a point where my mother killed herself, and my father we were left to deal with my father. That would be too hard on us almost, because I wouldn't want to. It would be hard on my father, and yet I couldn't let him get away with it, with what I would consider a murder that there was no way anyone would ever find out about. And so.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take quinol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why quinol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Quinol, the brand I trust.
For my mother's sake, I thought that we had to come, like I was saying before, we had to make a decision. It was one of the harder ones. It was a separate issue. Hey, these are the reasons my father should kill. There's no question what he's doing is impossible to live with myself and for myself, raised that way, so my mother. And what were the things that he was doing? It's obvious to me that he was doing all kinds of stuff, from totally controlling everybody in the family, being completely cold-blooded about his decisions, considering everyone sort of an instrument of his own will. And there's a lot of stuff that his dad was doing, including talking about disinheriting you, or actually having said that he did disinherit you against a couple of points. But I think that's the interest of us, and I felt like Eric and I could handle it. And he would expect us to handle it, and we would have, we were strong. And I still felt he was an ideal father for the longest time, because I felt like our dad can't be with us, and he's strong, he's overpowering, but he gives us advice. Fathers who are friends to the sons, in his word, like Wendy, don't give. And he teaches us to be a man, and almost as he had raised us to be able to handle doing this thing that was necessary, and that we could deal with it better than any other 18 or 21-year-old in the country. And he had trained us for basic training. My 21 years was a basic training on how to survive and how to do what was necessary. And survive by living without him, or by telling him to do it. By living without him. And that you would never have lived with him anyway. I mean, you never had that father-son closest thing. There's no. He had trained you mainly by being a disciplinarian and being tough, not by having a loving bond with you. Exactly. If you survive without having. I felt the bond, though. I felt like I would go back and forth as to whether I was close to my mother and my father. When I really started to see my mother's problems, I'd be more close to her. I came to my father, and then I'd get away from that. And when he had the problem with the heart condition and so on, I went in and I watched the Super Bowl with him, and we were close. And after the Calabasas issue, he cried, and we were together, and we were close. It was the first time he ever cried in front of me, and he felt much more uncomfortable. I used to feel very uncomfortable and cry whenever he told me around, because it was the usual thing, and I couldn't handle it. And because we were supposed to be man to man, he would say that. He would say, matter of fact, there was no emotion, and it bothered me too. And I could not talk to him about anything concerning anything emotional without getting too emotional myself. And then it changed. And he became the one that, as I became more comfortable with it, I could bring up the fact, I love you and I'm doing this to this. And he could not handle it. Couldn't talk to me about it. Didn't want to deal with anything like that, because it became a genuine emotion. If I expressed a genuine emotion, he would close up. And it would have hurt him. Like, it would be a kink in his armor. He couldn't withstand it. And he cried after the Calabasas issue, after I said that I was very sorry, and I'm sorry for all the trouble could not live without my father. And it was sort of nice for me to hear my cousin Sylvia.
Why did your dad have to die? I know from your mom why he had to die. I'm up with the two of you. What is clear to me how much he totally controlled the two of you, and it's also clear he was when he talked about it when you weren't here, he was very he was derogating about both of you in different ways. I mean, he would be judgmental of you in one way and judgmental of you, Eric, in another way. And it was real clear that at the same time he was saying he expected you, quote, to be men, that he was treating you as if you were disappointments and that you weren't strong enough. And that you were weak in one way and you were weak in another way. I don't know if that came across and if that was part of what you felt in your relationship with him, that you could never be good enough, you could never do another.
He even told Eric that the Calabasas issue and the way he handled it terribly. If he were in charge of it, he could have handled it way better than Eric. He had all kinds of mistakes, and you don't know how to do that either.
It wasn't even so much what you did, it was more that you were stupid in how you did it. You did it in an inferior and confident way.
But I still don't think it had anything to do with Killian, it had nothing to do with us. It had to do with me realizing a number of things that all culminated, which was, and it could have culminated at any point. And it was just a question of everybody getting together, somebody bringing it up, and us realizing the value in it, which was my father had a dream of now going into politics, and it was becoming apparent, and it was my mother would not be able to handle that. She had expressed over and over again how that would be the worst thing in the world for their relationship. What she wanted was for him to get away from his business and his Victoria, his life with business and stressed out and all these other things, and just sort of retire with her and be with her and get to know her. And if he were in the politics, he would again be that shell of a showcase for him, and he would be boom, 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 be very busy, be time consuming, and that would be his new love, politics, instead of business, instead of her, instead of her. And it would be sort of a therapy. He had almost said, I felt like, and now I feel like, he had given up women and taken up politics. There was a new affair. It's something that would be his passion. He was passionate, well, very passionate man, but not with her. She had expressed in her letters there was no passion. And yet on the outside, everyone thought that their relationship was all passion, all consuming. And it was crazy. But my feeling was that with him deciding to enter into politics, it was her doom. It was over. There was no escape. And Eric and I were he was on the verge of going to UCLA. No escape from what? What was the no escape from what? No escape from being separated from my dad in an environment, but in a relationship where she had no identity. And she was being better. And she at least felt comfortable in Princeton, New Jersey, and he knew that. And she had her friends, and she had a bonding, a relationship, and she was busy. And he took her out of that and brought her to California, and Eric and I knew it was devastating for her. I mean, it was really her death there. And if she get into politics, it would be another one. And it was just one blow after another, because moving to California was just the worst thing in the world, and she knew it. And for him, for her, it was great. He didn't care. It was the continuation of his career and this and that. His wife was obviously going to go with him. There was no question. He made a thing where he would fly back and forth to New Jersey because he realized that this was a serious thing. His wife might not be able to handle it. I think he realized that. It was obvious that he was very careful. Kitty, you're going to love it here. Come on. And Kitty was very sincere about the fact, I don't even know why she left. And so it was a time for divorce, or was it the best time to pursue it? Because she had a real bond there. It was a real emotional breakup with that community and her. And she had never had a friend out here, had one friend or whatever, and never really saw her that much. And he never inquired into tennis lessons or leagues or community things or nothing. She got involved in this house that Dad was building, and that was it. So we're trying to push her into those companies and for some of she just. And she would say, no, there's not enough money, I have to spend it on the kids.
Push her into,
She believed community activities.
She's probably too depressed and felt too powerless.
She was too depressed, and yet but she also, and it's an interesting thing I could put up, she believed, Dad had her convinced, and it was an amazing day when this happened, that they had no money. That he had her convinced that they were poor, and that she could literally not afford to take tennis lessons and do different things for herself and buy herself nice stuff and never get a leather jacket for a couple hundred. I was buying $100 jackets on the allowance I was getting easily, and she said she couldn't afford one. She could get one. And I remember a day when I said, "Come on, Mom," because I had bought something. "How can you say I can't afford this when Dad just got a stock bonus worth $6 million?" And she said, and she had no, his salary is $1 and she had no idea. She said, "What stock? What do you mean his salary is $300,000 or whatever it was?"
He totally controlled her.
And she said, "How do you know that? That's not true." And because we're cash poor. And I was shocked, and I said I knew it because I worked with the company, and it was right in the stock letter, which I didn't read. It said he got this much stock, and sure his salary was $300,000, $500,000, but his bonus every year was $850. No idea. And she didn't know about the life insurance thing. That came afterwards. So I realized that he was withholding a tremendous amount of financial information for him. My feeling then was, well, obviously, in case I get a divorce, he doesn't want to know, doesn't know it's divorce. But that enabled her to never buy anything, never do anything creative like that.
But see, when you said that, I think you're right about that, because there's another part of it, which is it also enabled him, again, to never allow her to have, your father was a totally controlling man, which meant that in a relationship, like you said, he needed to make all decisions. He needed to have her completely subservient. He needed to take all the will out of her, all the identity out of her, so that she was basically nothing but an extension of him and a shell of a person. So one way of controlling somebody so that they never develop any sense of identity, you tell me I have no money. They can't buy things. They can't have the ability to go and do community activities. They don't have the money to go out and develop an identity. It's a way of keeping total control of someone. So it wasn't only controlling the flow of information, but by telling her that they had money, it was also a way to keep her totally imprisoned and totally unable to develop any strength. If she had a sense of money, she might have also had a sense of freedom. She might have also had a sense of being able to leave, to get away from him, to escape him. If she had a sense of no money and no power, and emotionally she was really stripped of all of her identity, then he would put her totally under his control, which is real clearly what I think ended up happening with your mom. So I think you're right that your dad, in case we got a divorce, they don't have much money there, but I think even more, your father's whole instinct. To just completely control you. He used money and power to control you. He used money and power to control you, Eric, and he used it absolutely to control your mom. And I mean, isn't that really after all? Isn't that what it was about, Tony? I mean, wasn't it about the amount of absolute control and the ruthlessness in terms of just completely, almost being like an automaton? It was focused on, and it's like, do you think your father had any sense of what he even was doing to her? Or do you think that your father basically was so much on automatic pilot in terms of being focused on control and domination that did he not care? Or do you not know? What do you think, Eric? How about you saying something here? You didn't say a whole lot. What do you think?
I just don't like hearing it.
What does that mean?
I don't like hearing it.
You don't like hearing what?
I don't like hearing the sense of a father.
Ladies go. I'm sorry. Yeah. Hurt. Is that what?
Well, I pushed him on my money. And my father and my mother were two people that I love, and that's not them. It doesn't matter what they were or what they actually were, and whether it's offensive or it wasn't. I gave a very kind of my mind before this and led up to the fact where I had no other choice. I would have taken another choice. Because I look back on it and realizing when people are working so very much regret it. I may not have had a choice at the time, but I regret it now. And I simply I like the innocence I had when I was 14 or so. When, I had a mother and father that loved each other and loved me. And it was that kind of relationship. And I try to bring that back in my mind. It's kind of like it was like that. And I like it. And it's simple. And it's easy. And I don't like my father's with me still away. It's too painful. He was somebody that I loved, and almost had no choice to do what I did. And I hate myself for doing it. And I understand why it was done, but I somehow understand that's why. Because the love that I had for my life, and then somehow it was such a misconception with the family of what else. And no one understood. And having to listen to the fights. And some lady yelling and screaming, it's taking place downstairs. And finding blood on the back and different things. So I just tried to rationalize it. And I break that every once in a while because it's really difficult. I love my father and I love him and I can hear. It's more difficult to go than love it because I realize what a really tragedy of her life was compared to what it could have been because of my father. And I hate him for that. And I love him. And it was something completely uncontrolled. And what was not controlled? Didn't have to come. And eventually it had to happen. It was basically ruining my life and I get slapped. And it was putting another people in. And I got to the point where he was amazing that he would do great things for me. And I wouldn't understand why. I know that if you love me, somehow it was just, I could never tell you for sure. No. I was there, I remember when your mom called and called me and told me that your dad was disinheriting you because he didn't like how you were behaving with faith and he thought you weren't being respectful. He couldn't tell you because he never talked about feelings and he wouldn't talk about feelings. And I remember telling you that, and you didn't even look that surprised. I mean, that must have been what your dad was like for me. Well, I I'm sad because I look back on my life now with my parents, and I wish it would have been so much more different. I look back and I wish that my mother and I would have had an extremely close relationship, and I would tell her everything that would happen over. I would tell her everything. And all my relationships with different people and everything she wanted to know, and I was worried that I couldn't tell her, that she couldn't express to me. And I wish I had a close relationship with my father. The dreams that I have. And
You couldn't cook either one of them.
no, I just didn't have a good relationship. But literally, it's just, I guess, the thought, the whole father, you don't
You just don't want to.
have a close relationship.
You don't talk about feelings of what's going on.
You keep it inside.
Did you ever try to tell your mom or talk to your mom about what your dad was doing?
No, I couldn't face that. I left that up to my brother. I couldn't face that. That actually told my brother on the phone, and he handled that. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to realize. But I knew that if my mom had died, I would have to leave. I would have to leave. And it didn't matter because I always thought in my head that I could make all this moving around, it wouldn't make a difference. And I didn't believe it wouldn't be a problem. I would have to do it. And I couldn't live with them anymore. You know, I love them. And I guess I was taught to love them because it was your father. And because I wanted to love him. And I didn't really get it. That's why a lot cannot probably face the fact that my mother had to be killed. And it was really the only way out. And the only way out for it, and that's when he can't hardly face it. He knows that truth about the way he goes. If you would have to face that and understand that, it would kill you because it's just so sad. And it wasn't pissed off that he was like it. Earlier I said, I'm glad that he gave such a strong impression, but I really can't say whether I would have wanted another kind of father. Just wish the relationship would have been. And I have all kinds of opinions about it. And kind of there was one where I had was driving race to reference to shooting. And they wouldn't do it. They went on and tried to race them, so I took the gun that was in my hand and shot myself several times in the heart. And then I died. And it was a moment where it was just an immense pleasure. I was happy and there was no tension on my mind, there was no stress, and everything was calm and everything was great. And then I woke up in the morning and I was upset that I was alive because of the great feeling that I had when I was not all their life.
What kind of feeling?
There was feeling there was no oppression, and there was no more sadness to be had. You no longer had to feel sad about your parents, and because it's just so nice. And I guess one of the hard things about it is that everyone now, they don't know the truth, and they can't relate, and that's difficult.
You can't actually get into terms with that.
Exactly.
There's so much pain, and you know, it's so clear the both of you are relating to it now, not so much to the pain that you had in being in the family, although there's a lot of pain there. You both knew you'd escape that. You were about to go away to school while you already were away. But the pain of knowing that your mother was going to be left behind and victimized, and that she was so defensive and protective of your father that even while she was being totally destroyed by him, that she was blocking absolutely you, even your lover, or you're trying to help her, especially you, Lyle, well, trying to talk with her, that you were blamed for it, and you were loving her and trying to care for her, and picking up the blame for it, and you were asking to know what was happening. You knew the pain she was in, you saw her totally deteriorating, and it's almost like, I mean, your love for your mother was, and the pain with her getting just totally brutalized over all those years was, like, it was a lot worse than the pain you went through being with your dad. You thought you could do with your dad more than your mother. Your mother couldn't do with your dad. Your mother had no ability to do with your dad. So the regular to college, and then it didn't matter. Even if I was in college, I remember when I was in college, I wanted to major in theater. And my mom wanted me to major in theater, but couldn't tell me that because she was an actress and she was a great actress. And so she had to go out to theater. And she saw me on stage, like in Beverly Hills. She loved it, and she wanted me to major, but I couldn't even bring it up to my father. I did once, and it wasn't what he thought I was kidding. It wasn't even something that was going to be brought up. And my mom certainly knows that now. And so what I was doing, what I was taking, I wasn't even deciding. It was my courses, when I had an hour to select my courses, I would already have the season, already had it worked out. My dad would already worked out what I was going to take. And so, I mean, it wasn't, it was freedom in my life, and I was like, my life would be structured, and I would have freedom outside of structure. And I mean, besides the pain, I mean, Ron and I definitely had different kind of relationships, like parents in different ways. Certainly, dealt with it differently. Like I got scared with Lyle. I wasn't sure. Lyle really didn't talk about how he sort of was feeling after this all happened. And we talked about getting to learn about his feelings. And he probably relates more to me because we were supposed to be parents didn't care. And he told me that he was very depressed and so on. And I didn't know it because, we didn't talk about it. He was showing his feelings are different from mine. He wasn't as open about it. And I got worried. What his depression was a while, because I think he killed himself. And I cried about that one for a while. And I never tell Lyle before. This could come around that. Yeah, I don't know if I don't. By the way, one of my stuff can I tell that you're worried about it. Okay? Hey. No, come on, look at it. Tell your brother. Hey. No, don't be that strong. This is what the kind of idea that happened. We can cut this out, but you can kind of, you know what? This is part of your way of undoing what happened in the family. Eric needs to express his pain his way, and he needs to tell you how much he loves you and how concerned he was for you. It's really important. And maybe you're saying that to sort of save him, but you know what? You've got to put your hands to really be able to save himself and for you to get closer and have that contact is for you to be able to talk to him and couldn't about anything. Right? Okay? Can you think around how much? You can do it. There's a relationship. Yeah, there's a lot of weaknesses. Come on. This is what it was all about. The reason this is all about, what this is all about, is you, I haven't done this in games, but for you really to get to the place where you can deal with it and not be a prisoner of whatever happened in the family. Yeah, there's a reason. We love one. We have an impress each other in different ways. We love one. Yes. You told me that between the two of you, one of you has been dying, you die, and get my left. Did you say that? Did you say that? Yes. What do you think? It will work out. I agree that I need to how hurt you were, right? Eric told me what happened, and I remember the hurt, the pain. You could that you didn't talk with you about it first, you felt really violated. That was real painful to you.
And the worst thing about it was for them. There's so much. It could be something. It's such a tragedy in the family. It could be another tragedy if we don't be that close because and how it's other things first and so on and trust that we care. It's very hard to trust that you care. We've been taught to deal with it ourselves and then go a roundabout way and let up when it's necessary. You feel it's really important for me to get this, he'll push that for me, but without me really knowing the real reason why he's pushing for me, he loves me or whatever. And then we'll get real stubborn and hate each other about some little issues that I wish we wouldn't. I'll figure something, or I will figure my girlfriend more over an issue than I do myself. I'm very conscious of being take sides with somebody else, over myself, and I'll say, well, screw you. You don't care, and it's easy for that to happen. And that's something that would be very easy to be worked out about. We should have worked out some strange relationship where we can convey that, like you said, without having to stand face to face.
Why don't you say face to face right here, though? Why do you feel so good? Because you've never been talked to. Well, you've never been talked to. No. I feel like I'm trying to know. Wait. Okay. What am I here for? Aren't we doing some reasons where they can say it almost everyone else except for that? Okay, but wait a minute. You're trying to learn how to handle that. You're trying to undo that. You've got one family.
I think it stems from the reluctance stems and the mind stems from a pride issue. He's still afraid that I may not feel the same way and it's part of the country. That's the way I would say myself. And I love very, very much.
Can you show a little more person? Oh, God. Come on, you can do this. I know you
I hate that hugging shit, by the way. We fucking hate that.
You know what? I don't care if you I don't care if you do it. Just because you said that. Come on. No, you know what? You have to. All right. Come on. Yeah, you do. You do. You know what? Look, all the stuff that happened, if you want to reverse the fact that you couldn't be close, you let me. Okay? What I want to do is you let me.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
And you trust each other enough and you trust me enough. I don't want to have this be something where we're doing something that has to do with legally protecting you, because that's not what we're doing here. What we're really doing is trying to help you undo what happened and help you create what never got created, so that what happened for a reason, and that you now can create something between the two of you that was supposed to be at the beginning, because you're what you have left. You're your family now, and you don't want to be a victim anymore of what happened. And I know how much Eric loves you because you're not here. Okay, if I tell him that? All right? You just never said yes. He told me that if something happened, if anything happened and one of you had to die, he would much rather be him and you. He would much rather that if something happened to him, he doesn't even. Eric's got all kinds of problems with having anything to do with any money and anything as a result of all this. Feeling real guilty and bad about it. And he's having all kinds of difficulties with it. And, he said to me over and over again how much he loves you and how much he would really do anything for you, including many. With the point he had to know he rather would be him. And I know that it's not easy for Eric to tell you that with words, but you know what? You're talking about you being real sad with your mom. But it'd be just as sad if the two of you didn't get to the place where
I feel like that almost has happened a couple times. Obviously, it happened twice. Once where I was depressed and could never really convey it, and almost close to suicide, and thought it would be the best way out and a nice way out, and wishing that somebody would be good enough to have me killed. And then there was a time, then Eric also had going through a period where he never expressed to me that me saying that I was in Princeton, was going to stay in Princeton and go to school and not be part of the tennis tour would be emotionally devastating to himself. And his reaction is, okay, fine, if that's what you want to do it. I don't know, I think it's fine. And that's it. And me actually being hurt by the fact that he didn't care enough to say that he wishes I was on the tour. And so we both walk away majorly depressed. That he doesn't care if I'm on a tour or not. He's just making the wrong decision intellectually. And Eric's exactly going to tour with me. He doesn't care. And, and it can lead to suicide. And, just like, it led to my mother. And I still think Mom's was a suicide. Because, I feel that in her letters to Eric and I, she gave me the permission. And the burden seemed to continually be handed to me. Eric handed me it to talk to Mom. Dad handled a lot of things to me. To sort of give me permission to please carry out her suicide. And then it was obvious that she had decided to her mother she wants to die. She can't do it. And she doesn't want to talk about it. And there's nothing that I can do to help her. There's nothing anyone else can do. And she very much doesn't want anyone else to know. Doesn't want me to go to her Uncle Brian or if I look back, I wish I would have done. And just said, I feel like if I would have said to Uncle Brian, this is the situation, he would have done something. I feel that I have a lot of anger toward my relatives, my uncles, my aunts. My uncle calls and I Terry, he knew about what was happening to my mother and did nothing. I just think that they were cowards. That what Eric and I did took courage beyond belief, beyond strength. There was no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Eric's consent. I didn't even want to influence him in that issue. I just let him sleep on it in a couple of days. Because I'm in a very good position to influence Eric on a lot of things. Because he knows that I care and a whole number of issues and I can talk down with him or whatever. And but when it came to that issue, I wanted nothing to do with it. It had to be his own personal issue. He felt the same way I did about 20 months. And I feel angry toward my relatives. Why didn't you do something when you knew what was going on and I didn't? And now when I found out, I did something about it. I did what I thought my mother would want me to do, which is please kill me. And I can't, and I just couldn't just kill my mom. That would be ridiculous. I wanted to get rid of the source, but I couldn't live with that. Nobody could. And in a way, I'm happy that people say afterwards, there's no way that your mother could have lived without your dad. I'm glad, even my mom's side of the family says, I'm glad that if your dad was going to be killed for business reasons, that they were both killed. Even knowing what I know about it all, and the people that do know it all, my mom's side of the family does, and they think it's because it wasn't together so much, but my mom's side of the family, Sylvia and a few other people that have read some of the letters and know some of the stuff, feel the same way, that she couldn't have lived. She wouldn't have wanted to live. She wouldn't think of it as I wish she would think of it as I'm free, now I can take the money, go back to Princeton, I can recover and remarry, which is what I wanted for her. It was only after that ceased to be an answer, ceased to be a way out, that it was a dangerous situation where Eric and I realized at any point, sort of subconsciously, the go-ahead was given to kill us. Kill me before we leave. Basically leave our lives and go to separate ways.
Was they Russia afterwards?
After the car accident?
No, when the TV took news after she took too many pills.
So when was this?
That's what it was.
New Jersey?
Yeah.
Back in New Jersey, yeah. Took a long pill or something. It went down with the rest of the hospital or something. The New Jersey stuff, I didn't realize what was going on. I was in high school. I was dealing with him on a daily basis, and it wasn't as bad as when I was no longer around. She had something to occupy her time, all of a sudden she did. Eric wasn't on. So things got really worse. She didn't know about the affairs then, I don't think.
She knew that until she.
I mean, it was bad enough that she was really having a hard time dealing with her marriage just because of that. What my dad was putting her through without even knowing that he was putting her through it for completely devious reasons. And she was in bad enough shape, and everybody was my tennis coach, who was sort of a psychiatrist for me back then, Fred Warner, would say, "Dad, I really feel for the mother. She opens up to me a lot, and she's just tormented by her father, and I would hate to have her life go like it's terrible." And your dad is just a typical serious business executive, and he mentioned over and over that my nephew had having affairs, and I dismissed it entirely because I didn't think my dad was capable of that. And getting back to what Eric was feeling that I wanted to say, it would be great if we were able to work on it. Because even, our relationship, because even the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was one, because it could have happened at any moment. All the thinking beforehand was done. Right?
Yeah, I knew what you felt.
We knew it was felt, and we knew everything about that. Honestly, I never thought it would happen, even though I had thought about it. But it was done so quickly and so sort of callously almost, because one, if you thought about it too much, the feelings of not having your parents around and so on would get in the way of what was more important, which was helping your mother, really. And thinking about that and feeling for her, it was so easy to separate yourself. I'd done it for too long into your own life and go, I don't deal with my mother's agony. And it was sort of a cowardice way out. And for one moment before I went back to school, I had a chance, even though my life was going really well, and to show some courage, I felt, and help Eric and I, help my mother. And we got together, and it was the fact that we couldn't communicate together and sit down and face each other and talk about the real issues, that it was almost done looking in different directions. Just a little word here, a little word there, and a little word here. And this sort of thing you don't see your parents based on a little word here, a little word there. It was obvious that we felt a tremendous amount of emotion, exactly the same emotion. And it just took a little word here and there, almost as if a third party was discussing. Mm-hmm. And it was just a meeting of the minds. The time is now. It's not a great time. I'm doing well. I get ready to go to UCLA. We're psyched about a lot of things. But we can't ignore the fact that my mother has to live with us. And it was that. It was almost Eric with that. I mean, I remember when we had to go down wherever to take care of an important issue concerning it. He said, I can't do it. I've got to practice because I was attending the clinic. It was completely blocking that. And I was, I couldn't even tell him, but I was feeling, he doesn't realize the impact of what he's doing. He wants to take care of his father and wish his life was the same, and he still had normal pain that he never had. He doesn't realize that what he's doing, there will be no more things like that. There's going to be no more. All the little good things that are in a relationship. I think one of the biggest pains you have is that you miss just having these people around. I miss not having my dog around, if I can make such a gross analogy. Mm-hmm. That, whether I hated the thing that was around and I'm giving it away, now that it's gone, I miss all the things that we had a boating trip right before the incident, and it had nothing to do with the main problem, which required a lot of courage. But I miss not having my father, and it's almost worse after I find out more and more about how he's such a genius and all the things he's able to do, and more about the agony of my mother. That instead of her being a shell, I realized she was really feeling a lot of emotions that I wish I could have now confronted her and discussed things with her that I can't, and I didn't know and think I would ever have to do.
The tape recording has been played and will now resume at 1:30. We'll be in recess for lunch hour. Please return at 1:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you all back here at 1:30.
Your opinion with regard to why the killings were committed?
No.
Why?
Well, as I said, given the context of this inappropriate therapeutic relationship, given the fact that this is a reenactment or a replaying of something that was discussed in a session on November 2nd, in which Dr. Oziel's theory was explained to the brothers, given that this is a small portion of a session that was multiple hours long and we don't know what preceded it, given the inconsistencies within it, I don't put much faith in it.
Does it impact your opinion at all, the fact that this session was something that was done at Dr. Oziel's request or direction?
Objection, as soon as that's not evidence.
Sustained.
Did you discuss with Lyle Menendez how it was that this session came about?
I did.
And is there anything about that information that affects your opinion?
Yes.
And what is that?
Was my
Pause for hearsay.
Sustained.
Is it your opinion that the circumstances under which this session took place affects its reliability?
Yes.
And do you feel that the circumstances under which it took place made it reliable or unreliable?
highly unreliable.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Conte, when did you arrive in town?
Yesterday morning.
And did you talk to Lyle Menendez about this tape recording once you got back into town?
Yes.
Is there a reason you didn't discuss this tape recording when you were last in front of this jury?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Sustained. Let me ask if we can have one of the bailiffs go in and just quiet them down a little bit in the jury room. It's a little distracting for the jurors in the jury box.
Shall I continue? Dr. Conte, I believe you indicated the last time that you were here that you were not really interested in Dr. Oziel's notes or anything else. Is that correct?
I don't recall saying that.
Well, did you consider Dr. Oziel's notes the last time you came in and testified in front of this jury?
I consider Dr. Oziel's testimony. Yes, I don't recall reviewing notes.
All right, and at the time that you last testified, were you aware of this tape?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Were you aware of the existence of this tape the last time you testified?
Yes.
And so you now are telling us that in spite of the existence of this tape, that there's nothing on there that makes you feel that you need to amend your prior opinion as to why this crime was committed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I believe at one point in this particular session, now you do agree, do you not, that that is in fact Lyle Menendez's voice on the tape and on the transcript where it says LM for Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And you've spoken with Eric Menendez as well.
Yes.
And you have no reason to believe that that is not Eric Menendez's voice on the tape either, do you?
No.
And do you have any reason to believe that this tape has been tampered with in any way, that it's been doctored or somehow interfered with?
I have no reason to believe that the tape has been doctored with, no.
All right, so there's no reason for you to believe that the information coming from the defendant's mouths was said by someone else and then made up or something like that? In other
Well,
words,
I have reason to believe it was made up by someone else. I don't think the words came from someone else. I think as I testified, my understanding is that this is a replaying of material that was developed on November 2nd, some weeks before, and that this was made some hours after Dr. Oziel and the brothers were together.
were you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez saw Dr. Oziel on the 8th and the 9th of December?
I don't recall.
May I approach please with Exhibit 97?
Yes.
Showing you exhibit that's just been marked as Exhibit 97, it appears to be some billing records. I don't know if you're familiar with these records, Dr. Conte.
No, I've not seen these.
All right. To explain them then, it appears that they're from 1989, and the first page we're looking at appears to be January 17th, and there's an L there. there's been testimony that the L stands for Lyle and the E on this stands for Eric. And I'm going to show you the second page, or the other side of the first page, where there appears to be, this is 1988, I'm sorry, 1989, an entry for 12/8/89, L 1.5 sessions, and then 12/9, L 2.5. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated in your direct examination that it was your opinion that Lyle Menendez had not seen Dr. Oziel since November the 2nd. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would that billing sheet that I just showed you change your opinion in any respect?
Well, you just showed me dates that came after, I believe, isn't it?
No, this particular tape, and I think it was your testimony when Ms. Lansing asked you the question, this tape was made on the 11th of December of 1989, and the billing seems to indicate that on the 8th and 9th, which would be 3 and 2 days before December 11th, Lyle Menendez.
I got you. I'm with you.
Do you see my question now?
Yes.
All right. With that, did you discuss that fact with Lyle Menendez?
Not specifically. I did know that Dr. Oziel had a tendency to bill for sessions that weren't kept.
If somebody canceled.
Yes.
Okay, well, if you look at those records, you'll see many times there's a notation where it says no show, where the patient has not arrived. Do you see anything that looks like no show or no session next to the entries for the 8th and the 9th of December of 1989?
No, I don't.
How many hours would you say you spent talking to Lyle Menendez about this tape yesterday?
4, perhaps.
Did you actually have the copy of the tape in your possession when you
Yes.
spoke to him? And did you go over the tape with him?
I didn't go over line by line.
Did you have a copy of the transcript with you?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that this was not, in your opinion, a therapy session. Is that correct?
Correct.
At page, you now have a copy of the transcript that we all have, page 34. Would you please refer to that page?
Sure.
Your Honor, some but not all of the jurors have the transcript. Some of them have placed it. Does the court wish them to have the transcript while I question?
Well, I don't know what you're going to be doing.
I'm going to be going through the transcript now with Dr. Conte. Different pages and different lines.
All right, if you have those there, then you can look at them.
Dr. Conte, do you have page 34 there in front of you of the transcript which was provided to everyone today?
Yes.
And do you see there down at line 22, starting with the initials J-O, and thereon begins a colloquy between the participants and Dr. Oziel, where they're talking about whether or not Lyle had ever been told by his brother Eric before that Eric loved him. Do you remember that portion of the transcript?
We have one juror that doesn't have it. No, we have two then. We have two people that don't have them. So let's see if we get a couple more transcripts. Do we have any extras or is that it?
Those aren't the right ones.
All right. All right, then maybe you just have to share.
Well, I have, there's one more. Here.
All right, well, you can share, you can just look over someone's shoulder there and look. That'll be fine.
Dr. Conte, starting at page 34 and continuing on for quite a few pages, I think until page 39. There's a portion in there where Dr. Oziel is trying to get the two brothers to talk about their feelings for each other. Are you familiar with that particular portion of this session?
I am.
Would you consider that to be non-therapeutic?
Yes.
Why?
Well, it's highly manipulative. It's confrontive. It's pushing two clients to do something that they clearly aren't ready to do. And there's no indication that the session prepared them for that kind of highly manipulative interaction.
Well, you don't know what went on in the sessions before between Dr. Oziel and the defendants, do you?
No, that's the whole problem.
Well, you haven't made any effort to find out, have you?
That's vague. He's testified as that.
All right, why don't you rephrase the
Time
question?
before the tape, I'm not going to say.
Okay. Dr. Conte, you've just said that you feel that this is manipulative because these particular patients were not ready at this point to make this kind of a declaration of love for each other, something to that effect. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with what occurred in all of the prior sessions between the times that the defendants killed their parents in December the 11th of 1989?
I am aware of what Lyle told me, the person I was evaluating, took place.
During all those sessions?
Yeah, I didn't go through line by line, but I'm aware of the general gist of what took place.
Okay. And you were not aware until today that he had therapy sessions with Dr. Oziel on the 8th and 9th of December, correct?
I don't know that he had therapy sessions on the 8th. I know that he was billed for them.
So you never discussed, so did you discuss with him the stage at which his relationship with his brother was on December the 11th of 1989?
No, not specifically.
And yet it's still your opinion that you consider it very manipulative of Dr. Oziel to get these two brothers to tell each other that they loved each other.
Well, there's no foundation here that he's done that work. Now, you know, maybe in all the hours before when he was building up to this one little segment of tape, maybe he was doing great therapy, but it certainly isn't indicated in the prior pages of this therapy session.
All right, so you find fault even with this particular portion of the tape, is that correct? Pages 34 through 39, where Dr. Oziel is getting them to talk to each other about their feelings?
You asked me if it was therapy. I said I didn't feel that it was therapeutic.
Now, was there a reason that you did not ask to hear this tape prior to coming back into town this time?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
You understand the question?
Maybe approach.
Okay, sure. All right, we're now ready to proceed. All right.
Dr. Conte, I'd like to refer you to page 19 of this particular document.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Dr. Conte, you were asked on your direct examination about the Calabasas burglary, and you explained what your understanding of that burglary was. Do you recall your testimony in that regard this morning?
Yeah, I started to explain what I knew about it, I believe.
And did you mean to convey the impression that this was a childish prank?
No, absolutely not.
Were you aware of the amount of property that was taken in terms of the dollar amount in the second burglary in Calabasas in which Lyle Menendez participated?
I knew it was a lot. I don't recall the specific amount.
Did you know it was approximately $80,000 to $100,000 worth of goods?
I know it was a lot, yes.
All right. And were you aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez made restitution to the families that were, the family that was aggrieved? The father had to pay back cash to compensate for the burglary. Were you aware of that?
I didn't recall that.
Here, I'm going to object. I think that misstates the evidence.
All right, objection is overruled as far as the answer. He doesn't recall that, so that's the nature of the response.
In your discussions over the last several years with Lyle Menendez, did you ever discuss with him his participation in the burglary in Calabasas?
Yes.
And did you find it at all significant that he had participated in a burglary of this magnitude and evaluating whether or not he committed a crime on August the 20th or whether or not he acted out of fear?
Well, yes, I consider it significant.
And
I think it's a serious act, and I think it reflects problems that should have been addressed earlier, significant problems.
so did you ever consider the fact that it showed that he might have some criminal propensities?
I did consider that.
Did you reject that notion?
I did.
Now, I believe you indicated in your examination, again on page 19, or 19, that I can't remember the word you used this morning, but something to the effect of about the father crying, and that you found some inconsistencies in the tape in terms of Lyle Menendez talking about his father crying.
Yes.
Now, if you look at line 4 of page 19, he clearly says, after the Calabasas.
I'm sorry, can I get to my original as well?
Yeah, I think the pages are way off, though.
I tried to do the best I could to reconcile them over the break.
What page?
Page 19, Your Honor, of the transcript we have. He's working from another transcript.
All right, what line?
Starting at line 4.
Do you have that or here?
Yes, I got it. Thank you. I have it, Your Honor.
He has it.
Yes.
All right, it indicates here that after the Calabasas issue, he cried, and we were together, and we were close. That was the first time he ever cried in front of me. Do you see any ambiguity there in Lyle Menendez saying that that was the first time his father ever cried in front of him?
No, the ambiguity is a few lines later.
Okay, now the question was just as to this line. Now we're going to go down to line 21. He again says at the end of line 21, he cried after the Calabasas issue. And after that, Eric and I were very sorry. Then on line 25, he says he cried. That line 26, he says, I thought he cried a lot after the Princeton issue. When he says, I thought he cried a lot after the Princeton issue, did you find that to be ambiguous?
Well, no, and that's not what I testified to.
Right. Well, it appears clearly from this transcript in the tape that Lyle Menendez said on several occasions at page 19 that his father cried.
Right, and then three lines later, he says, I cried. I never saw him.
And then he goes on.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Watch Fisher.
No, I don't believe I indicated that there were ambiguities within lines, but rather if you take the statement as a whole, he describes his father is crying, which is a behavior which is inconsistent with everything I've heard about his father. And then he himself takes it away after this long list of incidents that he talked about.
Okay, and then at line 28, he says he would be very upset if I saw him crying or anything.
Right, men don't cry.
Right. Okay. Did you consider it possible that what Lyle Menendez was saying was true, that is, that his father actually cried over these incidents?
I did consider it, but it is so inconsistent with everything I know about his father. And he takes it back within the statement himself. Clients will often do that. They'll tell you a long string of things, and then they'll take it away at the very end. That's often the way people, when they're ambivalent about something. And I talked to Lyle about this, and he acknowledges that he often wished his father would cry.
So when you talked to Lyle Menendez yesterday at the county jail, he told you that his father hadn't cried. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so the several times it's mentioned on page 19 in his own voice on the tape, he is misspeaking. Would that be fair to say?
I don't know what the tone of the voice means.
Well, how would you explain? He says here.
I would explain that he was doing what he was told to do by Dr. Oziel, which was to use things that had happened in the past in constructing a tape that was consistent with Dr. Oziel's theory about what happened.
But if Dr. Oziel was telling him to take things from the past consistent with what had happened, he wasn't telling him to lie and make up things about his father crying, was he?
I didn't think Dr. Oziel told him specifically to do that. No.
Where's the evidence that Dr. Oziel told him to say these things that weren't true? What evidence do you have that Dr. Oziel told Lyle Menendez to make things up that weren't true?
What Dr. Oziel did was to give him a theory on November 2nd.
Okay,
they went over the theory and Dr. Oziel gave to them and said, this is, and it must have been like, and presented to, and then Lyle complies with that in this.
So what was the theory that, in your opinion, Dr. Oziel gave Lyle Menendez? The theory of abuse as a cause of the murder?
No, I don't see that abuse was ever mentioned with Dr. Oziel.
Did you review his testimony, Dr. Conte?
Yes, I did.
And do you remember did you look at the notes that he made from the November 2nd session where he talked to Lyle Menendez about the abuse in the family constellation being useful later on if he were ever caught?
He was not talking about abuse. He was talking about, as I recall it, Dr. Oziel's testimony was talking about the way that Lyle's parents treated each other, and especially the way Dad treated in terms of controlling and manipulation and that kind of thing.
You also are aware of the fact that in the November 2nd session, Dr. Oziel talks about the father's domineering and controlling of the defendants,
yes,
not the mother.
Yes.
Correct? Now, so you're saying then that Lyle Menendez was merely complying with the wish of Dr. Oziel to concoct this sort of family constellation. Is that correct?
I didn't say that. I'm saying that.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that I believe that this tape is largely, concoction is your word, but it is largely his compliance with Dr. Oziel's need to have something on tape which had his voice, in which he's talking about the killing, and Dr. Oziel had given him a theory about why this happened.
Well, did you discuss with Lyle Menendez why he would do that for Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And why would he, what did he tell you as to why he would comply with Dr. Oziel's need to have his voice on tape?
Because he was afraid of Dr. Oziel.
What was he afraid of Dr. Oziel?
Because Dr. Oziel could send him to jail. Dr. Oziel had information.
Well, wouldn't that then create in Lyle Menendez a motive to mitigate his responsibility for the murders when he talked on tape on December the 11th?
Well, he did mitigate. He mitigated the entire story, as near as I can tell. He didn't tell us what happened. It wasn't until much later when he's in jail that he begins to tell us about what really happened inside that family.
Now, when he talks about he and his brother discussing killing the mother and then sleeping on it for a couple of nights, do you consider that to be mitigation?
No, I consider that to be, in a sense, the truth of what happened the last week. There is this fear, there's this anxiety, there's ambivalence, they're not sure what's going on. They buy the guns, they wait for a while, they go up and down in what's happening.
So here at page 42, do you have the page, Dr. Conte? I'm
Yes, ma'am.
referring
What
now.
line?
What line?
Page, starting line 6, Your Honor. Are you ready, Dr. Conte?
Yes.
I mean, do you have the
I haven't heard a
cross-reference?
question.
Right, I thought you were looking at your other
Oh,
notes.
no, I just did on this. Thank you.
Dr. Conte, referring at line 6 now, where Lyle Menendez says in his own voice on this tape, there was no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Eric's consent. So you say that that particular sentence works in with your theory that this was a crime committed out of fear?
No, that's not the line you asked me about.
All right.
You
well-
asked me about the line, I just let him sleep on it for a couple of days. And one possibility is that that is a reflection of, in fact, what happened.
Isn't there another possibility that this was premeditated and not something born out of fear?
Well, if that's true, it's not consistent with anything else I've learned in my time on this, involved in this case.
But you saw Lyle Menendez after he'd been in custody for almost 2 years and was charged with a capital offense, correct?
That's correct. But I don't think that Lyle Menendez could fake the things that he told me. I don't think he knew to fake the things that make me believe what his life was like. He would not know to do it, and I don't think he could go read a book to do it.
Referring now to page 44, starting at line 24.
Yes.
Okay, where he indicates at the end of line 24, because even the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was, one, because it could have happened at any moment, and then it goes on to the next page, all the thinking beforehand was done.
Yes.
All right, now when he uses the word planning, then does that somehow work in with your theory that this was a crime committed out of fear?
It could, yeah. Let me get my, this is hard because I stopped reconciling before I got here. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question?
All right, the question is, that particular interchange there, when he uses the word planning, do you think that is consistent with your theory that this was a crime done out of fear?
Well, planning of self-defense would be consistent with this. But again, if you take one line out of this entire, what I've already said, I think is an unreliable document, and why it is unreliable, I cannot necessarily reconcile every line, but if you look across this with what is described, I don't think reconciling it is that difficult.
You don't think reconciling it is that difficult?
That's what I said.
All right. You indicated that you felt that that Lyle Menendez was trying to mitigate or minimize his conduct during the course of this tape, correct?
I assume that could be possible. You asked me if it was possible. I didn't say that he was.
Well, doesn't it appear when he's talking about giving his mother a break and killing her, that he's trying to say that really this was a mercy killing and it was not something that he should be really held accountable for?
That was Dr. Oziel's theory, and he was trying to give Dr. Oziel his theory because the charge of this session, as I understand it, was to get his voice talking about the death of his parents on tape so Dr. Oziel would be less anxious.
And during the course of this time, there's a lot of minimizing of Lyle Menendez's conduct in his own words, correct? Where he talks about, well, my mother was suicidal, and I was really glad to see the relatives came around and said, yeah, mom couldn't have lived without dad. You're familiar with that portion.
Yeah, but those are different things. First of all, it just doesn't make any sense that he would be calling mother's behavior of 2 years or more in the past to explain what happened in '89. That's Dr. Oziel's theory of what happened, and what Dr. Oziel wanted was his theory on tape. Now, if you look at the line, why he's angry with the relatives, that he may be angry at the relatives for a number of reasons, including the fact that the relatives ignored what was happening in that family for so long. I don't see that as minimizing. I mean, he says he did it, and he says he did it for this, what I find implausible theory of mercy killing. That's not minimization to me.
Self-defense is, though, isn't it, doctor?
Self-defense is a concept with the law that the law in California recognizes.
Did you talk to Lyle Menendez yesterday about why he didn't just tell Dr. Oziel what he told the jurors? Did you ask him that question?
I didn't ask him specifically, no.
Okay. Now, you indicated then that Lyle Menendez didn't trust Dr. Oziel, but he wanted to give Dr. Oziel what Dr. Oziel wanted.
Yes.
Okay. Can you reconcile those two things?
Yes. Dr. Oziel, there are many things. First of all, Dr. Oziel had information that could put Lyle into great trouble. And so keeping Dr. Oziel secure or not unanxious was important. Lyle was also worried about his brother who was suicidal. And it's clear from the tape how emotional Eric is. And if some idea, for example, that mom really wanted to be killed makes Eric feel better, then Lyle will go along with it.
And do you think that him saying that mom needed to be killed because she was suicidal might make him feel better too, Lyle Menendez?
It might make him feel better, yeah.
Going on to page 46 of this particular transcript, starting at line 5. Lyle Menendez says at line 5, and this is after a discussion of the killing of the mother and the talking that went into it, he says, almost as if a third party was discussing. Did you consider that at all psychologically significant, that he would describe talking about killing his mother as if a third party was doing it?
Well, I don't really think that's the gist of that. I think that entire section after Dr. Oziel's effort to get the boys, especially Eric, to say, I love you, I think that whole speech, we might call it, by Lyle is his effort. He's concerned. His brother's getting emotional. They've been there for some number of hours and it's all talked out, and all of a sudden Eric is getting emotional. And I think what Lyle was doing was try to do exactly what Oziel did as quickly as he could to get it over with. And in fact, shortly thereafter, for some unknown reason, the tape ends.
Did you ever talk to Dr. Oziel about this tape?
No.
And do you know if Lyle Menendez consulted with anyone before he made this tape?
He consulted with Dr. Oziel and his brother.
Do you know if he consulted with anyone else before he made the tape?
On that day?
Or and the week before?
We're
Yeah.
going to object to this question and ask to approach.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Dr. Conte, what things did you do once you found out that you were going to be returning to Los Angeles to testify about this tape in order to acquaint yourself with the methods or the means in which the tape was prepared? In other words, what things did you do to acquaint yourself with the whys and wheres of this tape?
I reviewed the transcripts from trial testimony of Dr. Oziel. or portions of it. And Lyle, I met with Lyle, consulted with his attorney, listened a number of times to the tape.
Now, Dr. Oziel's trial testimony had nothing to do with how this tape or why this tape was made, correct?
That's correct.
And do you recall in his testimony that he indicated that Lyle Menendez was interested in the ways in which Dr. Oziel could help him, Lyle Menendez, should he ever get caught?
Yes.
Did you discuss that fact with Lyle Menendez yesterday?
I don't think so. I don't recall.
Did you consider that perhaps it was Lyle Menendez who had something that he wanted to put on the tape on December the 11th of 1989?
I considered it, but that's not my understanding.
You rejected that notion?
That's my understanding, yes.
Now, when Dr. Oziel testified in front of this jury, you're aware of the fact that both of the defendants in front of this jury indicated that many of the things that Dr. Oziel said were correct.
That's correct.
Right, so he wasn't lying as to those things the defendants corroborate. Is that correct?
He was correct on some of the things he testified to, yes.
And at page 44 of this particular transcript, line 25, the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was because it could have happened at any moment. Do you recall that portion of the tape in the transcript which deals with that?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's your testimony that the use of the word planning does not in your mind indicate any kind of premeditation on the part of the defendants, but somehow is in fact consistent with your theory that this is a crime committed out of fear. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't believe that this is a real description of events leading up to the death of his parents.
Now at page 46, at line 25 near the bottom, there, Lyle Menendez is making discussing the fact of missing his parents, and he analogizes missing his parents to missing his dog. Did you consider that at all psychologically significant, that he would liken his parents to a dog?
Yes.
And what did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was, as he says, a gross analogy. I thought it was tragic that in trying to talk about missing someone, what he calls forth is a relationship with a pet. I suppose he could have talked about one of the stuffed animals there instead of talking about some real human being, some relative or some girlfriend or someone real in his life.
Okay, so rather than showing a cold and callous nature, you'd have decided that this shows the fact that he is in fact abused. Is that correct? That he was abused by his parents?
No, I don't think that this proves that he was abused, but I think that this analogy, which is stupid and horrible, doesn't prove that he was abused, but it talks about his life, and it's consistent with the way he talked about his life as essentially not having any other human being there for him. And so the model of what it's like to miss something isn't a model of missing a human being, it's missing a pet.
All through the tape, he and his brother talk about the fact that they do have a relationship with each other, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree that the majority of the talking on that tape is done by Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Now, at page 47, he makes reference, he's again talking in this last portion of the tape about missing this thing that he hated when it was around. And he's talking about missing his parents. And he says, starting at line 4, I miss all the things that we had a boating trip right before the incident, and it had nothing to do with the main problem, which required a lot of courage. Now, you're aware of your testimony in regards to how the boating trip played into the scenario of fear, correct? Yes. And in this particular portion of his monologue, Lyle Menendez makes no mention that this boating trip was in any way unpleasant, correct?
Correct.
Now,
he makes no mention of anything of the last week.
Did Dr. Oziel tell him to say that? Is there anywhere in this tape where Dr. Oziel's telling him, mention the boating trip and make it sound good?
I don't know that he did. I doubt that he did. But.
And is there anything in this transcript or in the tape where Dr. Oziel is saying, say that you planned it out and that will sound good and that will make me happy? There's nothing like that, is there?
No.
And there's nothing in there about Dr. Oziel saying to them, say that you talked about killing your mother and you slept on it for 2 nights, correct? There's nothing in there that indicates that that was what Dr. Oziel wanted to hear, is there?
No, I don't see that there's anything on here that directly indicates what Dr. Oziel wanted, other than he wanted reinforcement for what his understanding or his theory about the events were.
And this was so that Lyle Menendez could placate Dr. Oziel. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you had some criticism of Dr. Oziel for his dual relationships. I believe you talked about dual relationships in the terms of people becoming lovers or business partners with their patients, correct?
Correct.
Is there anything in this particular transcript or tape which indicates to you the formation of a dual relationship between Dr. Oziel and this defendant, Lyle Menendez?
Not in this tape, no.
Okay, so when you said that about the dual relationships, that there's no support for that particular conclusion of yours in this tape.
Well, again, I've said that this is a seriously flawed tape. My conclusion about Dr. Oziel's style and his work with these kids is based on much more than this one tape.
Well, are you familiar with any of the other sessions that Dr. Oziel had with Lyle Menendez?
I'm familiar with his description and Lyle's testimony about, for example, Dr. Oziel talking about how much pressure this case had put on him and how he was real good in business and had lots of business cards on his desk. I mean, that sounded to me like the development of a dual relationship. So yeah, I am aware of testimony that addressed that issue of dual relationships.
Now that we're considering Dr. Oziel because it's tape, looking at Exhibit 97, which is in front of you, did you notice all the number of times these records indicate a visit from Lyle Menendez? For instance, I believe if you look here, it says older son, 3.5 sessions on the 5th of October of 1988. Do you see that entry?
Yes, I do.
And would you look down there and notice that there are other entries which seem to either indicate the older son or L for Lyle?
Yes.
Okay, and you also see notations there for MM. Do you see that at the beginning of 1988?
'89 or '88?
88, starting in 88, which is, I think.
Oh.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes. I'm sorry, I can't find it.
Dr. Conte, on Exhibit 97, referring, I think we may just have the page incorrectly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
It says 1988, 9:30, and this appears to be the first entry dealing with the Menendez family. You'll see that the address originally was Park Livorno, Calabasas. It's crossed out to 722 North Elm. And it says here, 9:30, there's some sort of $150. Then it says 10-4-88 Eric, and then 10-4 double. Okay, were you aware of the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez saw Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
On occasion?
Yes.
And you're aware of the fact that the Calabasas burglary occurred in the summer of 1988?
Yes.
Okay, were you aware of the reason why Lyle and Eric Menendez first went to see Dr. Oziel?
I assume it was because of the Calabasas burglary.
Okay, why do you assume that?
All right.
Dr. Conte, have you been able to review Exhibit 97, which are the ledger sheets and the billing sheets from Dr. Oziel?
I skimmed through them real quickly while you were at the sidebar, yes.
All right, and do you notice that there are a number of times when it appears that at least there was billing done for sessions with Lyle Menendez prior to December the 11th of 1989?
Yes.
But when you're testifying about your opinion of Dr. Oziel, what are you basing it on in terms of his notes? Are you basing it on the October 31st, well, his testimony about October the 31st and November the 2nd?
Yes.
And no other testimony?
And I'm sorry, Lyle's, and to some extent Eric's. Lyle's I remember in particular.
All right, but as in terms of actually looking at Dr. Oziel's point of view, you have that only from his testimony, which dealt with the 31st of October and November the 2nd. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so when you're talking about him talking about the dual relationship, that is not information which you got from any of Dr. Oziel's notes or from his testimony, but rather information you got from Lyle Menendez, correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, you indicated one of the things you found interesting is that in spite of Dr. Oziel's testimony about the defendants talking about the perfect crime, that on this particular tape and in the transcript, there's no mention of the term perfect crime. And you found that significant, and you mentioned it in your testimony this morning.
Yes.
All right. But you are also aware of the fact that in this particular transcript and on the tape, the defendant Lyle Menendez is trying to minimize his involvement by saying he killed his mother out of mercy. Right?
Well, Yeah, you characterized minimizing, and I said that that was possible. I don't think that's what was going on, but it's possible.
It's also possible that when he talks about planning to kill his mother, that really is a sign of premeditation and not a sign of planning to be afraid of her, correct?
It's possible, but it's not consistent with everything else I've learned in this case.
Now, you indicated that there was no hatred expressed on the tape or something to that effect this morning.
Something to that effect. I think what I said is that there was not a great deal of hatred expressed. There were several places where the word hate was used.
Well, if Lyle Menendez, if this tape ever came into court and Lyle Menendez was aware of the fact that this tape someday might come into court, correct?
Correct.
And if this came into court and he talked about hating his parents a lot of the tape, that wouldn't help him out too much, would it?
I suppose it would depend on what the theory was.
The theory of the defense, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, at page 10 at line 8 of the transcript that we all have, do you see there at line 8 on page 10
Yeah.
that he talks about it being very angry with his mother because he was trying to help her and yet he was ended up being put in a position of defending things that his father was doing to him?
Yes.
Okay, so there was there at page 10 an expression of anger, which is not the same of hate, but it is, would you agree, a negative emotion?
It's a negative emotion. One of the things that I thought was quite interesting in that is that he talked about it with exactly the same tone that he talked about everything else in the tape.
Did you consider his tone of voice in the tape to be at all disturbing to you?
Yes.
And it appeared to be rather matter of fact, wouldn't you agree?
Matter of fact, potentially dissociative, or as if he were going through something which didn't have a great deal of significance to him.
Did you consider the fact that that might be a sign that he was somewhat asocial or antisocial?
I did, but that doesn't fit with over 50 hours I've spent with him.
Okay. So nothing about this really fits with what you've already testified to. Would that be fair to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, given the context, given what I think it was, given what I think was going on, I mean, some of it I suppose is consistent, but that particular, your characterization of his lack of affect, I don't think fits with what I know about him and my contact with him. Excuse me.
But you would agree that this tape shows a lack of affect, correct?
Yes.
Would you describe to the jury what lack of affect means in psychological jargon? What does that terminology mean?
In jargon?
No, in psychological, whatever vocabulary.
Okay. A lack of affect would be to talk with a somewhat monotone, not communicating any affect or emotion in tone of voice or tonality or up and down in the voice.
At page 16, line 3. At the first full sentence, that would anger me. Again, he's expressing anger about his mother. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me find it if I can. Yes.
And then again at page 18, line 26, he talks about he'd get close to his mother and then he'd hate his father. Do you see that there at page 18 and line 26?
Yeah, and then he talks that's in the same segment where he then later talks about feeling close because they watched the Super Bowl together.
So he's expressing conflicting emotions about his father. Is that correct?
Yes, if that's a genuine expression of his feeling.
Okay. Now, is it unusual for people to both hate and love their parents? Is that an unusual thing for people to have?
Well, it is actually quite unusual to hate your parent, to have strong negative feelings, to be angry at, to be mad at, and to love is not inconsistent. I'm not sure that a child can actually hate a parent.
You're not sure a child can hate a parent?
Right.
Have you ever known any children who said that they hated their parents?
I know lots. Yeah, but I thought we were talking in a psychological sense. Sure. I mean, I know kids every day say, I hate you. But to real absolute hatred, which is total rejection of the other person, beyond anger, it is a rejection of the other person psychologically. I think it's very difficult for kids because kids tend to be ambivalent. They'll be angry, but they'll be in love. They'll want to be independent, but they'll also be dependent.
Now we're talking about children, right?
Children and adults, it's the same thing. Those relationships continue regardless of the age of the person. Certainly, children or adult children can have strong negative feelings. The role of hatred, though, has I think, a special importance in psychology, and that's why I was suggesting that it's very difficult for an adult child or a child to absolutely hate a parent.
Refer now to page 46, starting at line 12. Dr. Conte.
Yes.
He indicates at the end of line 12, I remember when we had to go down wherever to take care of an important issue concerning, he said, quote, I can't do it. I've got to practice because I have a tournament coming up. And he was completely blocking out. Now, you're aware that Lyle Menendez there is referring to his brother Eric, correct?
Yes.
He's referring to an incident where they had to take care of some issue, which he doesn't specify, and his brother is saying, I've got to practice, I've got to practice. Do you see that there? Hey, do you recall the testimony from both Lyle and his brother about the Friday morning when they went to go get the guns in San Diego, that his brother was out practicing and Lyle came out and said, hey, this may look like a new day, but we've got some serious issues. Do you see this as a reference to the trip to San Diego?
It could be. If this is an accurate and a reliable document, it could be.
When you say an accurate and reliable document, do you have any reason to believe that this transcript does not reflect what's said in the tape?
That's not what I was referring to. I think I've been through this several times. I understand that this is an accurate transcription of what's on the tape. The question is what's on the tape and who wanted it and who created it and whose needs were being met by it. I don't know for sure that this is a reference to that Friday morning.
Did you talk to Lyle Menendez about that yesterday?
Not about this, no.
And when you saw that particular reference, did you say to yourself, boy, that kind of looks like what they testified to about Friday morning,
Yes.
August the 18th? You thought that to yourself?
I may have one of the time. I've been through the tape so many times.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Now, did you ask Lyle Menendez why he didn't just tell Dr. Oziel that this was a crime done out of fear?
Yes.
And did you discuss that fact with him?
Yes.
Okay. And did you also consider the fact that if in fact Lyle Menendez was just telling Dr. Oziel what Dr. Oziel wanted to hear, that Lyle Menendez was lying all through this? Did you consider that?
I considered that he was fulfilling what Dr. Oziel wanted, yes. And in fact, that was to provide information that was a lie.
And so Lyle Menendez was making, in your opinion then, when he's talking about his mother and her suicide and he was just trying to help her out, when he said, I was just trying to help my mother out and it was really an act of courage to kill my mother, so he was lying about that?
Well, you mentioned a number of things. I think what he was doing was to draw on old information, real experiences that described his mother's emotionality some years before. He was providing information, drawing on real life experiences to comply with or to fulfill or fill out Dr. Oziel's theory about why the murder took place.
But Lyle Menendez was adopting this theory as his own during the course of this tape.
He was signing on to it because it was vital to him to do that and because he was concerned about his brother and he wanted to see if his brother would get any assistance from Dr. Oziel.
Okay, you said it was vital for Lyle Menendez to sign on to Dr. Oziel's theory.
Dr. Oziel was a threat.
Wouldn't it be just as likely that it's vital for Lyle Menendez to sign on to this theory of self-defense because the people of the state of California and the criminal justice system are now a threat?
That's right, but to do that requires him to do what was impossible for him to do at that time, which was to reveal what really was going on in that family. And he wasn't ready to do that, and this is certainly not the person he was going to do that with.
But my point is, Dr. Conte, you're saying that Lyle Menendez adopted all these statements, which were in fact not true, in order to satisfy the needs of Dr.
I didn't
Oziel.
say that. I didn't say all the statements were not true. I just said that he drew on some things that were true, but were several years old.
And he used them as justification for killing his
In a
parents.
theory that was not true because it was Dr. Oziel's.
Why couldn't he have done the same thing for this jury then? Draw on experiences, elaborate on experiences in order to satisfy a theory of self-defense. He could have done that in this case for this jury, couldn't he?
Well, it certainly is possible. I'm not a human lie detector, but based on, I don't even know how many hours it is anymore, but it seems like a lifetime of involvement in this case. I don't think that he made up the essential details of his experience. You know, it is certainly possible, but I do not believe it. I wouldn't be here in this public forum going through this if I thought there was the slightest possibility of that. The essential story about what happened in that family, I do not believe is made up. And I can't have any scientific way to prove it, and you have no scientific way to disprove it. But everything I have heard convinces me that what took place in that family did in fact take place, and it was abusive.
And as well, that Lyle Menendez killed his parents out of fear on August the 20th of 1989.
That
correct?
is my belief, ma'am, yes.
That is your belief, correct?
That's right.
And you're being paid in this case,
No,
correct?
I'm not being paid.
You're doing this for free?
I got paid 70 hours in 1992 for over 500 hours of work, not even including the time I've been down here. If you actually factor in the money I've lost because I've had to cancel paying clients, it's somewhere below what Dr. Hart was getting paid. I imagine about $7 an hour. And I would not stake my reputation and would not participate in this at any price, but let alone $7 an hour.
Now, you just indicated that it is your belief that the family was abusive and that these things happened and that you're not a human lie detector, correct?
I'm not a human lie detector, but the story that I have heard, I do not believe was made up.
All right. If any of the vital facts of the story between August the 15th and August the 20th are not true, in other words, if Eric Menendez really knew all along that his brother wore a hairpiece, would that be something that might change your opinion, do you think?
It might, sure.
And if it turns out that they bought the movie tickets before the movie and not afterwards, would that change your opinion as to what had happened?
I would have to consider that changed fact in the entire constellation. It is conceivable that any fact could change my opinion if, in fact, it were demonstrated or proven to me that I had placed improper weight on it, or I had misconstrued it, or, in fact, had given it greater weight than I should.
And if there were evidence that Lyle Menendez had his girlfriend get books out of the library or do some research on child abuse, would that change your opinion as to the viability of him being able to fabricate this for you?
No, I consider fabrication. I don't think what he told me, especially the things that are more important in my assessment of his credibility, I don't think you will read in books.
And this particular transcript and the tape that you heard here in court today and over the last several days does nothing to change your opinion that Lyle Menendez killed his parents out of fear and not out of premeditation. Is that your testimony here in court today?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Conte.
Thank you.
We also
Dr. Conte, when you first became aware of the information contained in the November 2nd session with Dr. Oziel, you knew that the theory that was suggested there was that Mrs. Menendez was killed because she was suicidal and Mr. Menendez was killed because he was mean to Mrs. Menendez. Is that correct?
Yes.
Objection leading.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Overruled.
When you heard that that was a theory that came out of November the 2nd, did you examine that along with all other possibilities as a possible explanation for what happened in this case?
Yes.
Did you examine all theories to see if you could figure out what happened in this case, what the motivation was for the killing?
Yes.
And when you heard that Dr. Oziel, the theory out of Dr. Oziel's session was that Mom was suicidal in 1986 and 1987 and continued to be troubled, although less suicidal in 89. And Dad was mean to her, despite the fact that there was evidence that Dad was now being much nicer to her. Did you evaluate whether that theory made any sense?
I did.
And what was your
I don't
conclusion?
think it makes any sense.
Why?
Well, first of all, if you're going to make up a theory, you could certainly make up a more sophisticated and a better theory to explain the events, especially if, quote unquote, you're trying to be helpful.
But what, did you consider that as, aha, here's the answer. Here's exactly what happened. Did you think, well, maybe this is really what happened in the family?
No.
Why?
Well, because I've talked to a large number of individuals, and besides Lyle and his brother, who know this family. I've talked to the family members. They describe a family. I took into consideration what kind of a family it was and coming to my understanding of what had taken place in the case.
And did you look at all the various theories to see if that was an explanation that made sense?
Yes.
And you knew that one of the theories was that it was done for the money. Did you look at this case in terms of, is there support for that idea?
Yes.
And did you come to an opinion?
I don't find any support for it.
And did you look at this in terms of whether it was done because there was a desire to commit a perfect crime?
Yes.
And that theory was something that Dr. Oziel suggested that both Lyle and Eric had agreed to supposedly in the November 2nd session. Is that right?
Yes.
Objection, leading and mischaracterizes Dr.
Sustained.
Oziel's testimony.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
Did you consider whether this killing was committed because they wanted to commit a perfect crime?
Yes.
And what was your conclusion in that regard?
It's anything but a perfect crime, and that's not a theory that makes much sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Lyle Menendez, in his testimony in November 2nd, said that Dr. Oziel suggested the perfect crime theory, and he says, no, they never agreed to that.
It appears.
Is that correct?
That's what I recall.
Okay. And there's no mention in the tape of anything to do with a perfect crime. Is that correct? And Lyle Menendez indicated that when he went to Dr. Oziel on November 2nd, he told them he was not going to discuss the details, the facts of the killing itself, in terms of type of weapon, timing, anything like that. Is that correct?
That's what I recall.
Leading and beyond the scope.
Objection sustained as to the form of the question is leading.
Did you find any?
The answer is stricken.
Did you find any support in the tape that indicated that what Lyle Menendez said was in fact true, that there was no discussion of details of the killing?
Objection and proper conclusion.
I think I've asked a convoluted question. May I try again, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right. Lyle Menendez testified that he had told Dr. Oziel that he was not going to discuss the details. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And in fact, in the tape recording, does he again refuse to discuss details?
Yes.
Objection mischaracterizes the evidence.
Objection is overruled as to the form of the question. The answer will stand.
Lyle Menendez testified that Dr. Oziel was incorrect when he suggested that they said that this was a killing done without feelings. Do you remember that from his?
I'm sorry.
Lyle Menendez.
Spaced out. Could you say it again?
Okay. Lyle Menendez testified. Understand. Lyle Menendez testified that. Let me start again. Dr. Oziel testified that the brothers said that this was a killing done with no feelings. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez in his testimony indicated that that was not true.
Yes.
Does the tape reflect that the killing was done with no feelings or with great emotion?
Well, again, I think the tape is an unreliable source, but I do think because of the way people communicate and because people sometimes communicate inadvertently or unconsciously, I think there is reference to strong emotion at several points when Lyle and also Eric are talking about the killings.
Dr. Oziel testified that when Lyle Menendez came in, he was threatening and menacing, and yet on this tape, Dr. Oziel characterizes Lyle Menendez's behavior as being hurt and feeling violated.
Yes.
Is that correct? Did that characterization of his behavior on October 31st support what Lyle Menendez had told you and what he told these juries about his reaction to his brother revealing this information?
Well, yes, given my feeling about the tape, which I won't keep repeating, yes, it does.
Okay. Now, on November 2nd, after that session, there was an agreement to this theory of Dr. Oziel's in particular areas. One, that the killing of mother was for to help her because she was suicidal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Objection, leading.
Sustained. Answer is stricken.
Do you find anything in this tape that was not already agreed to by the brothers in the November 2nd session
Objection, calls
With
for
re-
sorry.
with regard to the motivation for the killing of the parents?
Objection, calls for improper opinion.
Sustained.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you if this changed your opinion, if seeing planning mentioned in the tape didn't change your opinion, right?
I recall that.
Was planning part of the November 2nd discussion?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Why does seeing planning in the tape not change your opinion?
Well, again, given all the caveats about the context of the relationship and the tape, it isn't always clear each time that it is mentioned exactly what is being referred to, whether it's the signing on to the sort of Dr. Oziel's theory, or it's perhaps the truth bubbling up through all of this chaos. If you were interviewing someone about whether they plan to kill someone, you would want a great deal more detail to conclude that.
Right, objection sustained. The answer is stricken, commencing with the witness saying, if you were.
Sorry, Your Honor.
I guess my question is this, Dr. Conte. When in the November 2nd session, Lyle and Eric sign on to a theory of killing mother because she is suicidal, that is a planned killing, isn't
Yes.
that?
Your Honor, objection is to the characterization of signing on by the
Sustained.
defendants.
Answer stricken.
Thank you.
When Lyle testifies here in court, that when Dr. Oziel said, I understand that you don't know your motivation, let me explain it to you. The reason you killed your mother was because she was suicidal. And he says, yes, that's the reason. That is the description of a planned killing, isn't it?
Yes.
And when Dr. Oziel suggests to Lyle Menendez, you killed your father because he was angry and controlling you and you could never please him. And Lyle Menendez says, yes, that's right. That's a planned killing,
Objection leading.
isn't it?
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay. So when the tape talks about a planned killing, is it any different than what they said on November the 2nd?
Well, in that sense of planning, no, it's not.
You were asked about sessions with Dr. Oziel on the 8th and 9th. When you talked to Lyle Menendez yesterday at the jail, did he indicate to you that he had contact with Dr. Oziel about the making of this tape prior to making it? That there were discussions?
It was a phone call, I know.
Well, let me go back.
I'm tired, and so to be honest with you, I don't recall everything
Okay.
that was said.
Was it your understanding that Lyle Menendez had contact with Dr. Oziel between November 2nd and December 11th?
Yes.
And was that contact with regard to Dr. Oziel wanting to see Lyle and Eric?
Yes.
And what information do you have in that regard in terms of why he wanted to see Lyle and Eric?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I think that the prosecution, by asking about the 8th and 9th, has opened to this area.
Well, what are you asking? What your client told the witness on an interview yesterday? Is that the
Yes, I'm asking him what his understanding
Well,
is.
that's not the correct way of phrasing it. It's not what his understanding is. It's what was told to him.
What was told to you by Lyle Menendez with regard to why that meeting was held December the 11th?
That Dr. Oziel had called and said that he was nervous, or that he had talked to Eric. And I don't recall, to be honest with you, at this point, how he communicated to Lyle, but that he was concerned that he hadn't seen them in so long. He was getting nervous, and that they should come in.
Okay. And he was nervous because he felt they weren't getting the therapy they needed, or?
No, he was nervous because he hadn't seen them and didn't know what was going on.
And what did Lyle Menendez tell you about what his fear would be if he didn't go in? What his fear was of what would happen if he didn't go in on the 11th?
That Dr. Oziel would go to the police.
So is that your understanding why he went in on the 11th?
Yes,
His primary reason?
yes. Well, that and concern for his brother. His brother was suicidal and he did, was concerned about getting help for Eric.
Was the primary reason, though, the idea that Dr. Oziel
Yes.
wanted to see him and he needed to see him? And he had other reasons as well?
Yes.
And you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich about Lyle's having been involved in this burglary in 1988. And you
Yes.
said that you thought that it represented a significant problem.
Yes.
And what did you mean by that?
Well, I don't think kids, young men, burglarize homes in their neighborhood without without some deep personal or family problem.
Okay.
Especially families that have resources where there is no real world survival interest being met. I don't like the term cry for help when it's applied to an act like that, but some people refer to it some mental health professionals as a cry for help. Pay attention to me, there's something wrong.
Okay. He's indicated that he's tired and it is 10 after 3.
Thank you.
You were asked whether Lyle and Eric had told Dr. Oziel about the abuse in the family.
Yes.
Now, there was some discussion about the controlling, domineering nature of the father. You had said, no, they didn't tell him about the abuse. What was it you were referring to?
They didn't talk to Dr. Oziel about their abuse, sexual and physical.
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
When you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich about the reference to the decision with regard to mom and talking about mom and the implications of
Just use the pronoun there, his mother.
The implications of killing their mother. Did you talk to Lyle about that particular passage and in terms of what was going on with he and his brother and thinking about the implications of buying guns and acting in self-defense and what would happen if mom was part of it, if the mother was part of this?
I'm sorry, I don't recall what passage we're talking about.
It's page 42.
Which line?
Page 42 on line 6 said there's no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Eric's consent.
Yes.
Now, did you talk to Lyle Menendez about that particular statement in reference to their being afraid and what would happen if they did take action? Let me rephrase it.
I may have, but I don't recall now.
Okay, if this will help you. Did Lyle Menendez reflect any difference in attitude toward defending himself against his father versus defending himself against his mother?
Objection made.
You're asking in the tape? In that
No, I'm asking about that passage. If when he talked to Lyle Menendez about it, Lyle Menendez explained that there was a difference in how he felt about protecting himself against his father versus protecting himself against his mother.
You understand the question?
I do, and it was an issue that was talked about throughout my time with him, but I don't recall specifically now what he told me. I'm sorry.
Did he seem to have different feelings with regard to protecting himself against his mother as opposed to taking action against his father?
Well, sure, I think it was his relationship with his mother was much more ambivalent. He wanted always for her to just be mom, just to love him. And he was willing, he testified, and I think I mentioned it as well, he was willing to, have her come back and sort of write off dad, come back to Princeton and I'll take care of you. So I think he had an incredibly ambivalent relationship with his mother.
When you talked about whether the Eric and Lyle would be in a position to discuss the true facts of the family situation with Dr. Oziel, you made some reference to dual relationships. And did you have information that Dr. Oziel was involved with Lyle and Eric on other levels other than as their therapist, supposedly?
Yes.
And what information was that?
Right, it has already been covered on direct.
I believe the area was explored again on cross, Your Honor.
Well, it's already been covered. He answered that when you asked the same question on direct.
Mrs. Bazanich pointed out places within the transcript in which Lyle Menendez talked about being angry or hating. Did he also talk about loving his parents?
He did.
And did he talk about getting angry with his brother?
He did.
So he was angry with his brother that he went to Oziel, and he talked about being angry with his brother on other times. Is that correct?
That's correct, but that's a figure of speech that refers to a whole wide range of emotion.
So a lot of people use the word, I was angry, or I hated it when somebody did this. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when you saw the words in this transcript or heard them on the tape that he was angry with his mother, did you form the opinion that he killed her because he was angry with her?
No.
Was that consistent with the idea that he was killing her because he felt sorry for her?
I suppose it's consistent. Again, anger, anger refers to a whole range of emotions. A child can say, I'm angry at you, and it can be a relatively minor feeling.
I have just a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
I can't get anything out of here. Do you have the ledger cards up there?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it on those? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mrs. Bazanich was showing you the dates. 12/9, 12/8, 12/9, and this is 12/11, E&L.
Mm-hmm.
Appears to say 9 1/3 sessions,
Yes.
$700 each. Now, does that refer to the length of time? When someone reports, when a therapist reports their billing and number of sessions?
Yes, although I believe Dr. Oziel testified that his sessions were 45 minutes in length. So presumably that means 9 1/3 45-minute sessions.
On December the 11th.
Yes.
And the tape is approximately 1 hour of that?
Yeah, it's closer to 45 minutes when I timed it, I think.
And you indicated that you felt that there was a lot of inconsistency in this particular tape in terms of saying things such as Lyle saying that he saw his father cry and then saying he never saw him cry. On page 18 of your transcript, and I don't have the number in the renumbered transcript that the jury has, but I believe your notes.
It would be, I believe, either 28 or 29 in the jury's transcript.
Okay, page 28, line 5. And Eric is speaking here and he says, I may not have had a choice at the time. And then later on that same page, page 19, I almost had no choice to do what I did.
Yes.
Remember those references?
Yes.
Do those make sense in the context of the theory that's being put forward here about killing mom out of pity?
No.
Are there throughout this transcript and these tapes statements such as that which are inconsistent with the theory that they are acting to just put their mother out of their misery?
Yes.
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustain the answers, but
Did you find a number of statements within this transcript which suggested that the motivation for the killing of the parents was other than the underlying theory that was being put forward?
Yes, given all of the caveats about the quality of the tape.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
then you get recross.
Yeah.
All right, let me step down your excuse.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And your next witness is ready? Okay, we'll take a recess of 15 minutes. Let everybody take a break, and then we'll resume with both juries at 25 minutes to the hour.